Chapter 2074. After a few days, the people from Ong Xing sect arrived at Mount Dulin. In the month that followed, they met up with the cultivators from the other sections. There were more sects in Shikong Desolate region. There were at least a few hundred of them. However, most of the sects that were qualified to participate in the tournament had arrived. There were some that were too far away or were located in a remote area. They could not make it in time and could only go there themselves. After 10 days, all the sects gathered and they set off again. This time, they did not use the Great Shifting Formation. This was because all the sects had to clear out the demons and monsters along the way. It was also a chance for the inexperienced disciples to practice their skills. Although the cultivators occupied a lot of land, other than the big sects that had a heavenly abode master, the small sects could only control the area around the mountain gate. They could not control too far away. There were still many demons and monsters in the wilderness. Jiang Mingtang sat in the flying boat. He was a little absent-minded. He looked afar from time to time. In his dream, he once saw a nascent soul cultivator bringing his disciples to seek shelter along the way. He claimed to be a rogue cultivator and was also going to participate in the Battle of Spell's Grand Assembly. Because the elders of the various sects saw that his cultivation was profound and his chi dynamic was upright, they brought him along with them. However, he knew that this person was actually an elder of Huanjin Temple. Because the people from the other sects often did things without scruples, they were often associated with evil. Hence, Huanjin Temple was entrusted by the big sects to send their disciples out to patrol. They tried their best to put an end to this before the tournament. Jiang Mingtang thought that Huanjin Temple had a heavenly abode master. It would not be easy to manipulate his disciples. Hence, if this person really appeared, then what happened in his dream was most likely real. After a few days of anxiety and anticipation, he saw this person appear. Whether it was the time when he appeared, or the appearance and the excuse he used, it was exactly the same as in his dream. At this moment he was completely relaxed. It was as if he was relieved of some burden. He started to think about how to make use of this matter for his own benefit. Initially, he did not want to come into contact with this person. He was afraid that he might accidentally change the future in his dream. But now that he thought about it, as long as he was careful, it would not affect the tournament that was thousands of miles away. He thought about it carefully and felt that there was something he could do. This Huanjin Temple doyen who went by the name of Lu Binan was good at making demon-suppressing talismans. It was extremely powerful. It could not only be used to deal with demons, but it could also be used on people of the same generation. If he could befriend his disciples, he might be able to exchange some of it with precious medicine. Then he might be able to do better in the tournament than in his dream. After making up his mind, he began to move. Because he knew the temperament and hobbies of this elder's disciple in advance, after making a series of careful arrangements, he became familiar with this disciple in just a few days. In the following journey, the two of them worked together to exterminate demons and beasts. The experience that Jiang Mingtang gained in his dream came in handy. Even though his cultivation was slightly inferior, but when he fought against the enemy, he always hit the vital parts and was able to find the enemy's flaws. He saved the disciple of Huanjin Temple from dangers several times. The disciple was very grateful and treated him as a good friend. Initially, Jiang Mingtang's intentions were indeed very utilitarian, but he felt that this person was generous and was indeed a person worth befriending. Thus, in the end, he gradually forgot his original intentions and never mentioned the matter of the talisman again. Even with the help of the flying boats, the journey took more than a year. Just now, they had reached the edge of the Western Forbidden region. However, at this point, they could already use the teleportation formation. Otherwise, they would not be able to cross the Chaos Magnetic Chasm. Whether it was the Eastern Wasteland land or the Northern Cold Abyss, there was no need for them to exterminate the beasts. The disciple of Huanjin Temple found Jiang Mingtang and said, "Friend Jiang, we will part here. I need to report to an elder in the sect with my teacher." After being in contact for more than a year, he no longer hid his identity from Jiang Mingtang. Moreover, there was nothing that he could not say here. Jiang Mingtang solemnly cupped his hands and said, "I hope to see friend Su at the battle gathering." Cultivator Su laughed and raised his hands to return the greeting. He said, "All right, we have a deal." Then, he threw over a talisman pouch and said, "Just a small thing, friend Su might be useful." Jiang Mingtang did not even look at it and kept it in his sleeve. He cupped his hands again and watched the light leave. Then he turned around and followed the people of the sect to the teleportation formation altar. In just an instant, he felt that the surrounding heaven and earth had suddenly changed. He was already on another land. At this moment, an elder Ong Xing pointed upwards and said, "Everyone please look. That is where the heaven patching formation diagram is." Jiang Mingtang looked up and saw magnificent palaces in the clouds. It was like a heavenly city, but it coincided with what he saw in his dream. It was said that this formation diagram was originally a place for all the sects to gather and discuss. However, considering that there were many sects from beyond the heavens who would come to the battle, this place was specially taken out as a place for the sects to stay. Right at this moment, a dense group of flood dragons with wings on their backs suddenly soared through the sky and flew towards that direction. It was a magnificent sight to behold. A disciple at the side exclaimed, "It's the people from Luolong Hall. I didn't expect them to come as well. It will not be easy to win against them." In the entire mountain and sea realm, there were only two sects that were the strongest. One was the 100 Achievements Temple, founded by a great mystic cultivator from the Eastern Baron who admired the Tao of Qi. The other was the Luolong Hall, founded by a demon cultivator from the 100 Continent of the South. However, the most powerful ones in this sect were demon cultivators who practiced the Tao of Strength. A disciple said enviously, "I heard that these great sects all have their own camps in the Heaven Patching Palace. I wonder when our Ong Xing sect will be able to join them." Jiang Mingtang felt a sense of pride and said, "There will be a day like that. In this grand battle, we will let the other sects know the name of our Ong Xing sect." Qinsong School, Floating Heavenly Palace, Upper Extreme Hall. Qi Yuntian was listening to a report from his disciple, Guan Inyue. There had been quite a few cultivators from beyond the heavens who had entered the mountain and sea realm recently. Other than a few powerful cultivators with powerful backgrounds, most of them were unknown. As the most powerful sect in the mountain and sea realm, the Qinsong School was responsible for protecting them. Although most of the foreign cultivators were intimidated by the Dark Azure sect's prestige and acted according to the rules of the realm, there were always some who didn't know what was good for them. When they encountered these people, no matter where they came from, they would be immediately suppressed. Although the mountain and sea realm didn't have any enlightenment crossing cultivators, they had Bo Bai and Bo Xian. Under the true Yang realm, no one could stand up to them. After a few rounds, no one else dared to challenge them. After Qi Yuntian heard the report, he ordered Guan Inyue to leave. After a while, he saw that Guan Inyue was still standing there. Qi Yuntian said, "Is there anything else?" Guan Inyue bowed and said, "Master, disciple heard from the sect that when the enlightened masters were observing the situation, they noticed that there was a change in the spiritual opportunity. However, it doesn't seem like it's declining, it seems like it's increasing." Qi Yuntian said, "What do you think?" Guan Inyue said, "The spiritual opportunity is still brewing, but it's growing stronger and stronger. This is a good thing, but there were no signs of it happening before. It's very strange." Disciple talked to a few fellow Taoists from the outer realm and discovered that it's not just the mountain and sea realm, but the other realms as well. Perhaps there's something strange going on here. Qi Yuntian said, "I understand. You don't need to worry about it. Just take the opportunity to cultivate. No matter how the spiritual opportunity changes in the future, the sect will take care of it." When Guan Inyue heard this, he respectfully acknowledged, but didn't say anything else. He understood what his master meant. As long as the Qinsong School had someone overseeing the world, they wouldn't have to worry about anything going wrong. In the Inata Monastery, in front of Mount Violet Branch, Zhang Jin and two other elders were greeting a fellow Taoist from the Green Jade Palace. His name was Chao Hai, and he was also a mortal metamorphosis cultivator. He had come to the mountain and sea realm with his disciples to compete in the Dharma discourse, and at the same time to explore the mountain and sea realm. When he arrived at the Guanyun continent, He first came to visit the owner of the Enata monastery. Taoist Chow Hai sighed and said, "The mountain and sea realm is indeed a good place. The spiritual opportunity here is no weaker than the green jade heaven." In his heart, he thought, a place blessed by the Supreme is indeed different. The spiritual opportunity here is not weak, it's almost comparable to the Kunsher continent. After Zhang Jin took charge of the Enata monastery, she had not been to other realms. She said, "I heard that the green jade heaven is also ruled by Yuanzun. It's a pity that I didn't get to see it." Taoist Chow Hai laughed and said, "There's nothing good to say about the green jade heaven. It's strict and boring. Speaking of which, before I came out, I heard of an interesting story." Zhang Jin said, "Elders said it's an interesting story. I think it's worth hearing." Taoist Chow Hai said, "One day, an ordinary rogue cultivator said that he was the reincarnation of a powerful cultivator. He even found the sect where the powerful cultivator was." Zhang Jin's mind raced. If a cultivator wanted to awaken the memories of the previous life, they had to at least have the means of true yang. However, it wasn't necessarily impossible to awaken the memories. Most of these were arrangements made by the cultivator before the reincarnation, and they weren't really awakened. They were just instilled into the cultivator through other means. However, she didn't immediately make a judgment. Since Taoist Chow Hai brought this matter up, the real situation shouldn't be that simple. Taoist Chow Hai continued, "But what's interesting is that the reincarnation of this powerful cultivator was taken into the sect by the disciple a long time ago." As he said this, the two elders who were accompanying him also showed expressions of interest. The sect felt that this matter was very strange and took it very seriously. They immediately sent people to investigate and found that the disciple of the powerful cultivator was not mistaken. The reincarnation of the powerful cultivator had indeed been in the sect for a long time. Taoist Chow Hai snorted, "At this point, the matter seems to have come to light." However, the rogue cultivator was very familiar with the things that the powerful cultivator had done in the past, and some of them were obviously private matters. Only the person involved knew about it, even the disciple of the powerful cultivator didn't know about it. In particular, he knew all kinds of cultivation methods and even secrets. Even the closest confidant had no way of knowing about it. This was definitely not something that a fake person could say. Zhang Jin pondered for a while, then looked over with her clear eyes and said, "Can you make a judgment on this matter?" Taoist Chow Hai had the fortune to see Zhang Yan once. At this moment, looking at Zhang Jin's eyebrows that were extremely similar to his heart unconsciously jumped. He calmed down and said, "There's no conclusion for now." Zhang Jin's beautiful eyes turned and said, "This time, fellow Taoist deliberately mentioned this matter in front of me. I think you want to borrow my mouth to send this matter to my elder brother. And there should be more than one matter. I wonder if I'm right?" Chapter 2075. Although Taoist Chow Hai's plan had been exposed, he did not feel embarrassed. Instead, he chuckled and clasped his hands in salute. "I had some thoughts that I couldn't hide from you, fellow Taoist. Please excuse me." When that domain discovered this, it reported it immediately. The Green Jade Palace also attached great importance to this matter. However, the cultivators in the palace, enlightenment purification, could not find the real reason despite all their calculations. Moreover, there was a great obstruction behind this. When they realized that this matter was not simple, they reported it to the palace lord, Fu Qingming. Who would have thought that the matter would come to an end here? The palace's upper echelons did not announce the reason. Taoist Chow Hai instinctively felt that this was an opportunity and tried to ask around. However, both the command hall elders and the secret hall elders kept quiet about it, and no news came out. Coincidentally, he had led his disciples to the mountain and sea realm. Because he had heard about Zhang Jin's background, he had deliberately traveled to the Guanyun continent and told her about it at the banquet. He wanted to see if he could find any answers there. Zhang Jin's eyes flickered, and she smiled faintly. "Taoist Chow Hai, you've traveled all the way here, but I've talked a lot with you. I'm sorry I didn't treat you well. There's a great light mountain in the Guanyun continent. The scenery is spectacular, and it's a good place for cultivation. If fellow Taoist doesn't mind, you can stay there for a while. Taoist Chow Hai smiled and stood up. I'm a guest, so I'll follow the arrangements of the host. Zhang Zhen said, Elder Song, please send Taoist Chow Hai off for me. Elder Song was a beautiful middle-aged woman. She stood up and said in a gentle voice, Please follow me, Taoist Chow Hai. After Taoist Chow Hai left, another elder surnamed Wang stood up and bowed. Taoist Chow Hai. This Taoist Chow Hai is a disciple of Yuan Zun. He could have asked his family about this, but he chose to come to you to ask for information. It's very likely that he did this in private. Zhang Zhen nodded slightly. It was not difficult for her to see that Chow Hai's action should have some kind of personal goal. However, she was also a bit interested in this matter. While she was in closed-door cultivation these past few days, she always felt that something was different than usual. Inexplicably, she felt that these two matters seemed to be related. She opened her mouth and said, I don't care what this person is planning. If the Aneta Temple wants to establish itself in the Yuhuan heavens in the future, this Chow Hai Zhenjin will be able to help. As the leader of a sect, her first thought was to spread her sect's teachings. Many sects were established in the Kuan-Shi continent, including an Aneta Temple. However, she had a big plan in mind. She wanted to spread the orthodoxy of the Aneta Temple to all the worlds. If he could leave a friendship in the Qinghua heavens, it would be useful in the future. Elder Wang nodded in agreement. In his heart, he also admired Zhang Zhen. Originally, after the Aneta Temple had ascended to the mountain and sea realm, its power structure could only barely be considered average. Furthermore, because of the limitations of its techniques, it didn't have much room for improvement. However, under Zhang Zhen's leadership, the situation was constantly improving. Now, it was gradually rising to the top, and it seemed like it would continue to flourish. Although this was also because Zhang Zhen was the younger sister of that person, he felt that there was no need for this. With this sect leader's aptitude and talent that far surpassed the previous generations, just by relying on himself, he could also open up a side of the world. After ordering Elder Wang to leave, Zhang Zhen returned to the demon-subduing hall. She waved to the left and right, turned into a side hall, and walked in front of a spirit-like jade wall. She poured her magic power into it, and in a flash, the jade wall rippled with spiritual light. Then, Zhang Yan's figure appeared. She bowed and said, Little sister greets elder brother. Zhang Yan smiled and said, Little sister, there's no need to be so courteous. I'm already aware of the matter that you wish to inquire about today. The matter this time was caused by the mighty force of a certain great expert, and it shook the entire universe. All sorts of strange occurrences were caused by it. However, it's not convenient for me to tell you about it. Zhang Zhen said, Dare I ask, elder brother, if this person will be a hindrance to us? Zhang Yan smiled and said, In the future, the signs of the heavenly mysteries will appear, and it will be a time of great prosperity for the various worlds. You must know that seeing the cause and effect is also a kind of opportunity. As long as a cultivator's heart remains upright, there will be no hindrance. Logically speaking, as long as a cultivator's cultivation base was below the spirit refinement stage, they would not be able to resist the Whaley response. However, it was not the other party who was actively targeting them. Therefore, the higher the cultivation base and the more orthodox the technique, the better they would be able to defend themselves. Right now, only the unorthodox sects and rogue cultivators were affected the most. However, as long as they saw the heavenly mysteries, as long as they knew when to advance and when to retreat, it would not be a bad thing. Zhang Zhen thought for a while, then bowed again and said, Thank you, elder brother, for clearing my doubts. Zhang Yan smiled and said, You and I are siblings, there is no need to say such things. If you have any questions in the future, you can always look for me. Zhang Zhen pursed her lips and smiled, I will definitely not stand on ceremony. After the siblings exchanged a few more words, Zhang Yan's figure gradually disappeared from the jade disc. Zhang Zhen was deep in thought. Just now, she noticed that Zhang Yan was talking about the heavenly mysteries and not just the spiritual opportunity. This meant that the coming heavenly mysteries would be extremely beneficial to the cultivators. If she could grasp this opportunity, she might be able to cut off her past and future body in advance. Thinking about this, She gave a few instructions and went into the jade disc to meditate. In the blink of an eye, several months passed. It was impossible to tell how many sects had arrived in the Heaven-Mend matrix, and all of them had come from beyond the heavens. There were also many almighty cultivators who had come. One day, a beam of white light suddenly appeared. Many people saw this magnificent scene, and it wasn't difficult to guess that it was another heavenly abode heaven disciple. Some people who were familiar with the techniques of the various sects of the mountain and sea realm felt that this person's cultivation was somewhat similar to that of the Qinsong school. However, just by looking at the aura, they couldn't tell who it was. Of course, no one thought that it was a disciple of the Qinsong school, because such people would never come here. When the beam of light reached the bottom of the jade disc, it suddenly stopped, and Hua Yingling walked out. Behind him, a number of cultivators walked out one after another. These were the cultivators from the child realm who had followed him here, and were also here to participate in the magical competition. When the disciples saw the spiritual opportunity, they couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. It really is the atmosphere of the upper realm. The spiritual opportunity alone is not something our realm can compare to. I never thought that there would be so many fellow Taoists here. It's not like our realm, which is so desolate. When we travel outside for a year or so, we don't even see a single ordinary Taoist cultivator. At this point, the Taoist attendant flew up on a cloud and asked, "May I ask which fellow Taoist has come?" Hua Yingling thought for a moment, then said, "I am a Taoist cultivator from the Profound Cauldron sect." The Profound Cauldron sect? The Taoist attendant stared blankly for a moment, then his expression changed to one of incomparable respect. "Your accommodations have been arranged. Please follow me, Reverend." Hua Yingling thought for a moment, then said, "Master's reincarnation has once again stepped into the Tao. As his disciple, since I have come to the mountain and sea realm, I should pay my respects." Years ago, Zhang Yan had made him apprentice to Fu Baoxing. Although they were master and disciple in name, the dharma of master and disciple was still there. Since he had been reincarnated, he couldn't afford to be disrespectful. Meanwhile, in one of the pavilions on the map, Jiang Mingtang watched as Hua Yingling left with the Taoist attendant. He thought to himself, he really came. He knew that although Hua Yingling appeared to be an almighty being from another realm, his background was not simple at all. Rumor had it that he had a deep connection with some almighty being from the Qinsong school. But which almighty being was it? Every time he thought about this, his memories would go blank. Then he would have a splitting headache, and he would forget many of the things he remembered. Therefore, he didn't dare to think too much about it. In his dreams, he had been recognized by this person during a battle, and had even been given some pointers. That was how he had been able to come across such a fortuitous encounter. Unfortunately, someone had tried to stop him from befriending him, and he had missed an opportunity. Since that had not happened yet, he had to take advantage of this opportunity. Hua Yingling had just arrived at his lodging when he suddenly stopped in his tracks. The Taoist attendant asked with concern, "Reverend?" Hua Yingling shook his head and said, "Nothing." Just now, for some reason, he felt that something was related to him. Therefore, he calculated for a bit and found that it seemed to be related to a certain person, so he didn't put it in his heart. In this battle, there were countless opportunities. There were people with good intentions, and there were also people with bad intentions. There were many causes and effects involved, and it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that there were thousands of them. It was impossible to sort everything out, and it would only add to his troubles. Therefore, as long as it didn't involve his own safety, then he didn't need to care too much about it. Thinking about this, he continued to follow the Taoist to his lodging. Just as Jiang Mingtang was thinking, a young cultivator ran over and said angrily, "Shixiang, just now Shixiang lost to a disciple from the Luolong Hall. He actually dared to bully the Ong Xing faction. Shixiang, your skills are superb, you must go and teach this person a lesson." The official battle gathering had yet to begin, but the disciples of the various sects had gathered here, and it was inevitable that they would spar with each other. The disciples of the Ong Xing faction loved to fight, and they would appear in almost every battle. Jiang Mingtang said, "Where's Shixiang Wan? Why isn't he fighting?" The young cultivator curled his lips and said, Xixiang, it's not like you don't know Xixiang Wan's temper. If he didn't have 100% guarantee, he wouldn't dare to fight. Jiang Mingtang thought for a while, and thought to himself, just in time. Hua Yingling was coincidentally here. If he saw it, then he would definitely notice. If he didn't, then he would just take it as raising the reputation of his sect, and it wouldn't be a loss. There would still be a chance during the battle gathering. Actually, even if he and Hua Yingling didn't cross paths, he wouldn't feel that he had lost too much. After all, he had gained hundreds of years of experience, and there were many opportunities he could find. He said, I'll go with Xixiang right now. He followed the young cultivator to the location of the battle, and after greeting the disciple from the Luolong Hall, he began to fight. He had experience and knowledge that far surpassed his peers, and his foundation was also far more stable than that of a normal Ongxing faction cultivator. He easily won this battle. But after that he couldn't stop. Within half a month he consecutively defeated more than 10 people of the same path, and helped the Ongxing faction increase its reputation. The elders of the faction were extremely happy, and bestowed him many good things. Jiang Mingtang knew that compared to the favor of that person, these things were really nothing. Thus, he continued to wait patiently. After fighting for another 20 days or so, he finally got his chance. Chapter 2076. Today, Jiang Mingtang's opponent claimed to be from the pure school of Beyond the Heavens Pond. However, he knew that this person was actually a cultivator from the Yitong Jie, a disciple brought by the Huazhenren. So if he fought with this person and won, or if he continued to fight with this person's fellow disciples and won, then he would definitely attract the attention of the Dong Tianjinren. On a high platform somewhere, Hua Yingling stood with his hands behind his back, watching the battle. He had an expression of admiration towards Jiang Mingtang's performance in the battle. He thought that this young cultivator was not bad. His foundation was not strong, and his achievements were limited. But he had thought of a way to make up for it, and his future path of improvement was even wider. Seeing this, he knew that the fate of his clan was with this disciple. What was strange was that he could feel that this person was also clear about this. This was very interesting. He ordered the child standing next to him. The latter bowed and walked towards the location of the battle. This time, Jiang Mingtang defeated his opponent without any suspense. After he retreated, he saw a child come in front of him. The child bowed and said, Senior Martial Brother Jiang, my clan's Zhenren invites you over for a chat. Jiang Mingtang stilled. He had seen this Dao child in his dreams and knew that he was Hua Yingling's child. He didn't think things would go so smoothly. He suppressed the excitement in his heart and said, Of course I have time. Please lead the way, Junior Martial Brother. The child said, Senior Martial Brother, please follow me. Jiang Mingtang followed him and came to an altar. Seeing Hua Yingling standing there with his energy restrained, he hurriedly lowered his head and went forward to bow. Yet when he finished bowing, he heard a sentence that made his heart jump. You knew I would find you? His entire body froze and he didn't straighten up. Hua Yingling said, Raise your head. Jiang Mingtang slowly straightened his body. What he met was a pair of smiling and teasing eyes. For some reason, his heart relaxed. Hua Yingling smiled. You don't have to be nervous. No matter what you know, that's your own fate. I won't do anything to a junior disciple like you. But in the future, don't make presumptions about people of a higher realm than you. If you meet someone with a bad temper, even if I kill you, I won't be able to reason with you. Jiang Mingtang hurriedly bowed again and sincerely said, Thank you for your teachings, Dao Master. Then he couldn't help but ask, Since Dao Master knows this junior's plan, then why? Hua Yingling smiled. Me appreciating you is my own business, it has nothing to do with anything else. Jiang Mingtang came to a realization. The other party only cared about doing things according to his will. Whatever Jiang Mingtang thought about it, it did not matter to the true master heavenly abode. After all, the difference between the two of them was too great. It was so great that the latter did not need to care about such things. Hua Yingling said, These few days I've looked at the techniques of your high star sect. There are some good points, but there are some flaws in the foundation. However, you are different from your sect. It seems you have made up for it yourself. You did not do too badly. You did not rashly correct the remaining flaws. It seems you are waiting for a better opportunity. Jiang Mingtang felt cold sweat. Now, he felt that rashly coming into contact with the upper realm powerhouses was not a good choice. Right now, he had met someone with good intentions. If he suspected that they had evil intentions, then it would be hard to predict the consequences. But he could not be blamed. The people of the true master heavenly abode were powerhouses of a region. Other than the battle gathering, where else would he see them? Even in his dreams, he had not interacted much with such people. Hua Yingling took out a jade talisman and gave it to him. You are a person of great potential. Take this technique and study it. It will solve your current problem. If there is anything you don't understand, you can ask me again. Jiang Mingtang let out a breath and took the jade talisman. He said, "Thank you for your guidance, Jinren." After he bowed, he took a few steps back and turned to leave the altar. Not far away, a ball of light spread out. A Taoist holding a horsetail whisk walked out. He said, "Jinren Hua, you seem to appreciate the disciples of these small sections." Hua Yingling nodded at him and said, "So it's Taoist Duanqi. I believe that regardless of whether they are from the unaffiliated sects or rogue cultivators, everyone is the same. Compared to us, they are only lacking in opportunity. I see that Jiang Mingtang has some redeeming qualities, so I will give him a chance." Jinren Duanqi smiled and did not say anything. He had cultivated for so many years. Anyone with good potential would have been taken away by the large sections. How could there be so many talented people left outside? Compared to the disciples of the large sects, these people were naturally lacking. Hua Yingling knew what he was thinking. But in the past, his talent had been changed by Zhang Yan. So sometimes, fate really was more important than anything else. But the prerequisite for this was one's own temperament. Otherwise, why would he choose someone else over him? He was willing to give pointers, not for himself, nor for the sect. He was simply willing to give these disciples of the small sects a chance to improve themselves. Jinren Duanqi looked off into the distance. Standing on the heaven-mending array diagram, he could not see the geography of the mountain and sea realm. He did not even know where he was standing. It was as if he was surrounded by a barrier. He said, "Fellow Taoist Hua, why do you think the fellow Taoists of the mountain and sea realm are hiding from us?" Hua Yingling said, "They're just afraid of disturbing the spirit qi of the outside world. Many of our qi and spirit qi are gathered in one place. If they leak out, it will inevitably shake the land." Jinren Duanqi could not help but chuckle. Not necessarily. He realized that after entering the array diagram, it was impossible to get out. This was most likely a trap set up by the almighty beings of the upper realm. However, everyone was tactful, and no one deliberately revealed it. He thought to himself, "With this arrangement, I'm afraid that if something happens here, even if it's a battle between cultivators of the heavens paradise, it won't affect the outside world." After Jiang Mingtang returned, he sat down in his secret chamber and placed the jade talisman on his forehead. Instantly, a series of exquisite incantations appeared in his mind. After he finished reading, he felt much more spirited. There was only one technique inside, and it was not a secret technique. However, it could help him solidify his foundation. Just that alone made this trip worthwhile. 10 days later, he emerged from seclusion in high spirits. He was just thinking about whether or not he should go to Hua Yingling to express his gratitude when a disciple came looking for him. The disciple said that they were nearing the location of the battle, and that the elders were gathering the disciples to meet up with him. In the past, the great sects would take turns hosting the battles. However, this time, because cultivators from other worlds were involved, it could be said that the entire mountain and sea realm was the host. Therefore, it was not set up in the inner realm, but in a part of the sky. Normally, it would not be easy for junior disciples to enter and leave, but with almighty beings involved, things were different. Even if there was a fierce battle, it would not affect the outside world. Jiang Mingtang tidied up a bit, then went with the disciple to a spacious rooftop. Looking around, he saw that all of the disciples of the Soaring Star sect were here. Off in the distance, he could see cultivators from various sects standing on the rooftops. However, the area around the array diagram was still shrouded in mist, making it difficult to see what was going on. Perhaps it was because he had been in the limelight recently. Just now, under the envious gazes of the crowd, he was called over by one of the elders. It was at this point that everyone felt their bodies sway. It did not seem to be the heaven-mending formation diagram trembling, but rather, their souls being affected. When they regained their composure, they felt a warm breeze brush past them. The mist that covered the area gradually parted, revealing a vast expanse of land. The mountains, and the heavens were all bright and dazzling. Although it was a magnificent scene, it seemed to be dyed with colorful ink and overflowed with a boundless brilliance. Everyone breathed in and out, and felt a clear spiritual energy slowly flow into their meridians and lungs, making them feel incomparably comfortable. Perhaps it was because he had just finished recuperating his foundation, but Jiang Mingtang took a moment to adjust his breathing. He found that his cultivation base had improved, and couldn't help but feel delighted. The heaven-mending formation diagram did not stop at this point. It headed towards a green mountain in the sky. Everyone's eyes were fixed on it. If there were no accidents, it should be the location of the competition. At this moment, a flock of gorgeous feathered birds flew past, and the leader was a huge phoenix with 2 heads and 2 tails. On top of it stood a cultivator in a brown robe. His hair was tied up in a casual bun, and he looked carefree and unrestrained. He only took a glance at them, and then no longer paid attention to them. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared in front of the mountain. Someone asked curiously, "May I know which sect's cultivator is he from?" Immediately, an elder stroked his beard and said, "There are many sects that rear foreign species and even spiritual birds and beasts. The most famous ones are the Clear Feather sect and the Blue Feather Pavilion. These 2 sects have some connections, but in terms of the sect's structure and the cultivation of the sect leaders, the Clear Feather sect is the first. However, the Blue Feather Pavilion is a lower sect of the Qinsong school, so we shouldn't underestimate it." At this point, he looked at the disciples and said in a deep voice, "In the competition, I don't expect you all to win against the disciples of the big sections. As long as you don't lose too much face, it will be fine." Even though they knew that the elders said this intentionally, it still caused many disciples to feel indignant. They didn't think that they would be inferior to those of the same path. Someone shouted, "No matter how powerful the disciples of those sects are, it's nothing. Who knows how many times senior brother Jiang has won these days?" Jiang Mingtang shook his head and said, "Junior brother is wrong. Some people lost to me because they were afraid that their killing moves would be seen by others, and some people were unwilling to fight with me. Don't underestimate the people of the world. Even the small sects have outstanding talents." Hearing him say this, the elder unconsciously revealed a gratified gaze and said, "You can see this matter clearly, it's really not bad." That floating mountain looked close, but in reality, it was extremely far. After a few more days of travel, just now, they gradually arrived there. At this moment, there was only that tall mountain as far as their eyes could see, but they couldn't see the world in front of them anymore. At this time, a whirlpool suddenly appeared on the mountain and swallowed the entire formation. In a certain cloud cave on the floating mountain, Blue Feather Pavilion's sect Master Han Xiaoda was standing there, looking into the distance as if he was waiting for someone. At this time, the sound of footsteps could be heard, and a young cultivator with long limbs walked in from outside. His attire was different from ordinary cultivators. His long hair was tied up, his sleeves were slightly narrow, and his robe was close to his body, making his figure appear even more robust and tall. He cupped his hands and said, "Are you sect Master Han?" "I am Clear Feather sect's Yang Yanjin." Han Xiaoda turned around and sized up the other party. He cupped his hands in greeting and said, "Sage Yang is too polite." Yang Yanjin clasped his hands behind his back and said in a clear voice, "Sect Master Han, that mysterious person is about to arrive. Since everyone has given the order, then we can't escape." Han Xiaoda said, "Just now, I received news that this person is on good terms with a fellow Taoist grotto heaven. That person is suspected to be Han Yuan's disciple, so if this person comes out to obstruct us, it's not convenient for me to take action. Oh, it's actually Han Yuan's disciple? Yang Yanjun was a little surprised, but then he smiled confidently and said, "It doesn't matter. If Sect Master Han is concerned about feelings, then I'll take action." Chapter 2077. After the cultivators from the various sects arrived, the Taoist attendant arranged for them to stay in Heaven Peak. Although Jiang Mingtang was only a disciple, he was given his own Immortal's Cave. Along the way, he heard some of his fellow disciples grumbling about how this was supposed to be a grand competition among the various sects, and yet they were treated so lightly. Even the competition between the smaller sects had everything they needed, and they were given luxurious mansions, tall buildings, and pavilions. This place was nothing like a desolate cave. When some of the disciples heard this, they began to make a ruckus. The Taoist attendant who had brought them here wasn't the least bit annoyed. Instead, he told them that there was a magnificent mansion in the middle of the mountain, and that if they didn't want to stay here, they could go there. However, they would have to pay for spirit shells and medicinal pills. The mountain and sea realm was rich in natural resources, and all of the sects who had come had reached a certain level. Naturally, they wouldn't care about trifling spirit shells and medicinal pills. Furthermore, the competition was going to last for a long time, and no one was willing to stay in a cave that looked like a place for bitter cultivation. Therefore, most people refused to stay here. Jiang Mingtang didn't intend to do that. Based on his experience in the dream, he wasn't used to living in a place like this, and had ended up staying with his fellow disciples. However, things were different now. After receiving the technique from Hua Yingling and combining it with his experience in the dream, he had gained a lot of insight into Taoist magic, and had decided to focus on cultivating it for a while. Unfortunately, he had received too much attention, and his fellow seniors and fellow disciples would occasionally come looking for him. It was quite a disturbance, and the cave seemed to be very secluded, which was exactly what he wanted. He parted ways with his fellow disciples, and then, under the guidance of the Taoist attendant, he quickly found his own residence. Looking around the entrance, he saw that it was indeed a simple and crude Immortal's Cave. Other than a prayer mat, there were no other decorations or furnishings. It seemed that the great sects really didn't care about them at all. However, he didn't feel like he was being treated unfairly. After interacting with Hua Yingling and the other upper realm cultivators, he knew that to the great sects, neither he nor his own sect counted for anything. If it weren't for the fact that he was a guest, he probably wouldn't even have a place to stay. Even as he pondered the matter, he began to walk forward. Just now, he heard a rumbling sound behind him as the stone door closed. He tried to go inside, but found that he couldn't. It almost looked like he was being imprisoned. He wasn't sure if they were afraid that he would wander off, or if they had some other purpose. However, since they were already here, they might as well take things as they came. If these large sects wanted to target them, they wouldn't have to go through so much trouble. He went straight to the praying mat and sat down. Just as he was about to meditate, he seemed to have discovered something. He raised his head and saw that there was a crystal jade that was emitting a blue brilliance. It was just that because the position was concave, he didn't see it before. He sat down cross-legged on the prayer mat, and was just about to enter a meditative state when he noticed something. Looking up, he saw a crystalline jade inlaid there, emanating a deep blue glow. Because it was in a recess, he couldn't see it just now. He thought for a moment, then stretched out his hand and concentrated on it. A moment later, he saw the crystal jade emit a blue brilliance, and at the same time, a phantom of a teacup appeared in his hand. Then, it slowly solidified, and the fragrance of tea wafted out from it. After a moment's thought, he reached out and focused his attention on it. A moment later, the crystalline jade emitted a deep blue glow, and an illusory teacup appeared in his hand. It slowly solidified, and the aroma of tea wafted out. This really is 100 Flowers tea? He couldn't help but be shocked. The 100 Flowers tea was a high-grade spirit tea that he had tasted at a fellow Taoist's birthday banquet after he had reached the Yuanying realm in his dream. Supposedly, it was a rare tea plucked from the Kunshi continent, and had the ability to increase one's cultivation base and magical power. It was something that couldn't be found in the mountain and sea realm. He quickly rotated it, and found that his magical power was being pushed along by the clear chi, and was slowly rising. It's actually working? He was even more shocked. Looking at the crystal jade, he waved his hand, and a blue glow appeared. Suddenly, a jade couch appeared, as well as an embroidered tent. He pointed at the corner of the couch, and the blue light shone down, and a huge cauldron appeared. After a few more tests, he was sure that he could use this unknown crystal jade to turn illusory into something real, and create anything that he could imagine. However, it had to be something that he had seen before, or something that he was familiar with. For example, he had heard of the clear violet spirit aura, and knew that it was a good item. However, he had never seen it before, and therefore couldn't summon it. No wonder this cave didn't need to be set up at all. If you wanted something, you could just think about it. It was far superior to the arrangements of the small sections. By this point, he was starting to understand the intentions of the large sections. This thing was an opportunity, and if you didn't discover it, or if you didn't want to live here, then it was your own lack of luck, and you couldn't blame anyone else. He searched through his dream memory, and found that there was no such thing. Later on, he didn't hear of such a thing being spread out. It wasn't that it didn't happen, or that the person who benefited from it didn't announce it to the public. He looked at the spiritual tea in his hand again, and drank it all in one gulp. Then he raised the cup, and as the blue glow swayed, the cup was filled again. In this situation, even with his calmness, he couldn't help but get excited. Although after drinking too much of this item, the effect of this tea would gradually decrease, but this kind of good item, how many times could he taste it in his life? Therefore, he didn't care about anything else, and drank to his heart's content. Every time he drank, he would circulate his mana. After about 20 cups, he felt that the improvement was very small. After thinking for a while, he tried to conjure up more good items. He had hundreds of years of experience compared to his peers, and his vision was very broad. There were also more opportunities that he could use. It could be said that everyone's experience determined each other's gains. However, after doing this for a long time, he suddenly felt very tired all over his body. Although his mana was clearly rising, he was abnormally tired. The blue light was also intermittent, and it was difficult to guide it down again. Therefore, he guessed that this item might be related to his spiritual consciousness. He was afraid that this would damage his foundation, so after realizing that something was wrong, he immediately stopped and didn't be greedy anymore. In any case, his harvest today was enough. Therefore, he collected his mind and continued to comprehend the cultivation method. After an unknown amount of time, he heard a rumbling sound, and when he opened his eyes, he saw that the cave door had opened. He calculated, and before he knew it, he had been in seclusion for 12 days. Looking up again, he found that the crystal jade had disappeared without a trace. He didn't know when it disappeared, and he couldn't help but feel a little regretful. However, after all, he had already benefited from it, and if he were to brood over it, he would sink into obsession. Therefore, he quickly let it go and walked out. He first went to the sect, and found that everything was stable. Now that there was not much time until the grand meeting, the disciples of the various sects had already stopped sparring, and were now conserving their energy. As for the matter of the crystal jade, he was originally thinking about whether or not he should tell the sect elders about it, but just as he thought about it, he felt an indescribable force stopping him. It was as if he said it out loud, something bad would happen, so he immediately gave up on the idea. Seeing that there was nothing going on, and that there were still some unsolved problems in his cultivation, he went to Hua Yingling's residence. Halfway there, he saw a Taoist walking towards him. He recognized that the other party was also a Taoist grotto heaven who had been very close to Hua Yingling recently. He quickly bowed and greeted, "Greetings, Taoist." Taoist Duanqi looked at him with a strange look in his eyes, but it quickly disappeared. He smiled and said, "Are you looking for Taoist Hua?" Jiang Mingtang didn't expect this person to take the initiative to talk to him, so he quickly replied, "Yes." Taoist Duanqi said casually, "Have you been in seclusion in the grotto these few days?" Jiang Mingtang paused, then lowered his head and said yes. Taoist Duanqi didn't ask anything else, but said, "Your cultivation is still shallow, it might be difficult for you to go to Taoist Hua's residence. Follow me, I'll bring you there." Jiang Mingtang quickly said, "Thank you, Taoist." Taoist Duanqi smiled and brought him to Hua Yingling's residence. Although there were Taoist deacons along the way, they all thought that Jiang Mingtang was Taoist Duanqi's personal disciple, so no one stopped them. Not long after, the two arrived at a cloud peak, where Hua Yingling was already waiting. He bowed to Duanqi and said, "Greetings, Taoist friend." Duanqi also bowed, and just as he was about to say something, he suddenly looked in a direction. Hua Yingling also turned to look in that direction. After a while, two figures appeared there, their auras surging, no doubt that they also had grotto heaven cultivation. Hua Yingling bowed and said, "Taoist friends, where are you from?" The two also bowed, and the Taoist on the left introduced himself. "I am Jade Feather Pavilion's Han Xiaoda." The cultivator on the right cupped his hands and said, "I am Yang Yanjun, a disciple of Clear Feather Pavilion." Hua Yingling said, "So it's sect leader Han from Jade Feather Pavilion, and Taoist Master Yang from Clear Feather Sect." Yang Yanjun said, "If we're talking about being rude, it's us. Sect leader Han and I are here for an important matter, we might offend Taoist Master later." Hua Yingling could tell that the two came with ill intentions, so he said, "I would like to ask for your advice." Yang Yanjun first glanced at Jiang Mingtang, then at Hua Yingling and said, "There's a person beside Taoist Hua with mystical abilities, we need to take him down, I hope Taoist Hua will not stop us." Jiang Mingtang's face paled when he heard this. Hua Yingling frowned. Enlightened being Duanqi took a step forward and stood next to him. Hua Yingling looked back at the two and said, "Can the two of you explain what exactly is going on?" Han Xiaoda said in a deep voice, "This matter was decided by everyone, we are not clear about it. If Taoist Master Hua has any questions, you can ask him later. I believe this is not a difficult matter for you, Taoist Master Hua." Yang Yanjun stared at him and said, "Taoist Master Hua, what is your answer?" Hua Yingling sighed and shook his sleeve, but he separated a portion of mana to protect Jiang Mingtang. Then, his figure flashed, and he escaped from the place. Taoist Duanqi shook his head and escaped as well. Han Xiaoda waved his sleeve expressionlessly. When a token flew out, countless restrictions on the entire peak flew up and surrounded Taoist Duanqi, blocking him from moving forward. Yang Yanjun revealed a mocking expression and looked at Taoist Duanqi. "Since I've found you, do you think you can escape just like that?" Chapter 2078. Hua Yingling brought Jiang Mingtang outside and stood motionlessly on a floating rooftop. Jiang Mingtang was still in a state of shock. Only now did he realize that those two weren't coming for him. It made sense. He was just a core formation cultivator, why would they need to send two grotto heavens? This was clearly a setup to target someone of the same generation. It would be so easy to get rid of him. Any grotto heavens could just send a letter to the Xing sect and the sect would obediently hand him over. There was no need to go through so much trouble. Even if Hua Yingling admired him, he would not stand up for him. Just now, he was just bringing him out so that he would not be affected by the battle. He searched through his dream memories and found that there was no such person as perfected Duanqi. The strange thing was he had never thought of doing this before. He guessed that perfected Duanqi was like him and also saw the future. Perhaps because perfected Duanqi's cultivation level was higher, he could not see him in his dream. This also reminded him that what he saw in his dream had its limitations. Not long after, he saw splendor blossoming on the distant peak. Yang Yanjun and Han Xiaoda came out, but Reverend Duanqi was nowhere to be seen. He must have been captured by the two of them. The two then came before Hua Yingling. Han Xiaoda bowed to him and said, "I have my reasons for doing this. If I have offended you, please forgive me." Hua Yingling returned the bow and said, "Sect leader Han, you don't have to say that. Since it is your arrangement, there must be a reason for it." In reality, he and perfected Duanqi were only on friendly terms. They were not close friends. But he would not deliberately belittle perfected Duanqi just to clear his name. Now that he thought about it, perfected Duanqi, a cultivator from the Yuhuan heavens, came to befriend him. His motive was clear. He must have wanted to use his identity to hide something, but he did not manage to escape in the end. He was not very clear about the details of the matter, but it was not difficult for him to feel that there was something unusual about the recent situation. Combining it with what Yang Yanjun and Li Xiandao had said just now, he felt that these two matters might be related. He thought to himself, maybe I should send a letter to the sect to ask. Yang Yanjun cupped his hands and said, we have captured this person and will leave now. I hope perfected Duanqi can keep this a secret. Hua Yingling nodded. Of course. At this time, Yang Yanjun glanced at Jiang Mingtang. He could see that this disciple was a bit strange, but since the higher-ups didn't take care of him, there was no need for him to meddle. Moreover, a core transformation cultivator wasn't afraid of causing trouble. If something really happened, there was no need for him, a heavenly abode realm cultivator, to come out and deal with it. He and Han shouted about again, then flew away together. Hua Yingling turned her head and said to Jiang Mingtang, you came to find me today because you have a problem with your cultivation? Jiang Mingtang lowered his head and said, yes. Hua Yingling looked at him and said calmly, I see that you are not at peace. Today is not the time to discuss. You can go back first. After you have calmed down, come find me. Jiang Mingtang expressed his gratitude and took his leave, returning to his own residence. The reason why he felt uneasy was because he was afraid that those almighty beings would really find him. If that happened, all his ambitions would be useless. However, from the looks of it, since no one did anything to him, it meant that no one was paying attention to him, so there was no need to worry about this for the time being. However, after experiencing this shock, not only did his desire to seek the Tao not collapse, it became even more urgent instead. Because without strength, one could only be at the mercy of others. So what if he possessed a few hundred years of memories? Moreover, it was only a few hundred years of experience. Which cultivator who cultivated to the Grotto Heaven realm didn't have hundreds or even thousands of years of cultivation? He reminded himself that he had to be careful and not make any mistakes. He had to avoid the opportunities in his dreams if he could, lest he repeat Shinran Duanqi's mistakes. Anyways, the gains in front of him were enough for him. After Jiang Mingtang left, Hua Yingling returned to her residence on the peak. She personally wrote a letter and sent it to Zhang Chan's cultivation cave. In the Wanke star stream, the two of them had fought together against enemies, and it could be said that they had become friends. Zhang Chan, as the trusted aide of her own ancestor, should know something. But after half a day he received Zhang Chan's reply. Only then did he have a general understanding of the situation. Recently, the spiritual opportunity had been unusual. Due to some kind of change in the heavenly mystery, the karma of the world was thrown into chaos. Some people had glimpsed a change in the heavenly fate. These changes might not really exist, but it was very possible. After these people saw it, they could avoid the calamity or find many opportunities. Seeing this, he couldn't help but think of Jiang Mingtang. This junior suddenly stood out from his peers. Perhaps this was the reason. As he continued to read, he realized that there was more than one situation. For example, another was that the cultivator was infected by the heavenly mystery, and another person's consciousness appeared in his body. This was the most important thing to keep a close eye on. Because if this person was seriously infected when their consciousness was completely suppressed, they would no longer be the original person. Normally, if a cultivator cultivated in the sect, they would naturally form friendships with the elders of the sect. When they were outside, they would rely on the protection of the sect, and at the same time, they would take the initiative to protect the sect. However, after becoming a completely different person, one could no longer treat them as one's own family. This was because a single change in one's thoughts could possibly bring about serious harm to the sect. Moreover, the higher one's cultivation was, the greater the damage would be. Duanqi was in such a situation. He was originally an elder of a sect in Jianjitan, but one day, he suddenly attacked and killed 2 other sect elders. Moreover, he stole the sect's treasures. As for the tens of thousands of disciples in the sect, they were turned into ashes with a wave of his hand. Most likely, he had entered the mountain and sea realm not only to avoid the people of the myriad heavens, but also because he wanted to find more opportunities. Of course, he had no idea that such evil thoughts could not be hidden from the divine sovereigns of Bo Xian and Bo Bai. However, as cultivators of the heavenly paradise, they had the power to destroy mountains and destroy continents. Now was the time of the grand tournament, and in order to not cause too much damage to the mountain and sea realm, they had waited until they were inside Heaven Peak to make their move. After Hua Yingling finished reading the letter, he realized that it didn't say whether or not Reverend Mortal Metamorphosis had occurred. It was impossible to say whether or not it had never happened, or whether or not these people had hidden themselves away. He frowned deeply. If even Reverend Mortal Metamorphosis was affected, then it would be extremely terrifying. The damage it could cause would not be small. Fortunately, his patriarch was there to oversee things, so there shouldn't be any problems. A few days later, outside the Mijun mountain of the Guangyuan sect, Yang Miaosheng floated in the sky. Her hair was tied into 2 buns, and she was dressed in a lake green dress. Her entire body was immersed in a beautiful cloud, and from time to time, she would roll here and there. In her hand, she held a willow branch and swung it around. She looked rather bored. The sky suddenly darkened, and then she heard the cry of a crane. She made a sound of surprise and showed some spirit. She stepped on a cloud and looked up into the sky. She saw a young Taoist walking in. At first, she could not see him clearly, and his qi dynamic was also blurry. However, as he walked closer, his figure and appearance became clearer, and his qi dynamic also became clearer. Yang Miaosheng's eyes lit up, and she curtsied. "Greetings, fellow Taoist Fang." Fang shun and returned the greeting and said, "Sorry to keep you waiting, fellow Taoist. I'm here under the orders of my master to capture that person with you." Yang Miaosheng threw away the willow branch in her hand, and her eyes widened. She said excitedly, "Are we going to make a move now?" Fang shun and looked at her and said, "Fellow Taoist Yang's fighting spirit is strong, but it's different from what the other Taoists said." Yang Miaosheng suddenly felt a little embarrassed. She actually didn't like to fight with others, and usually she just went sightseeing, observed the erosions, and comprehended the mysteries of the great Tao. She never cared about the matters of the sect, but this time, she was brought along to bully someone, so it was a different matter. She coughed and changed the topic. "I wonder who we're dealing with this time?" Fang Shenan said, "Did fellow Taoist not read the letter in detail?" Yang Miaosheng didn't even blink. There were only a few sentences in the letter. It didn't say anything about the person's identity. At the time, she had been looking at an eroded jade slip and had casually glanced at the letter before tossing it to the side. As for the other letter, when she thought about it and looked for it again, she found that it had long since disappeared. Fang Shen and didn't care about such things and said, "The person we're going to capture is called Yuanzong. He's the same as Duan Qi that sect leader Han and Master Yang are trying to capture today. He's also from the myriad heavens, and has destroyed no less than 100 sections. He's just entered the mountain and sea realm, but it seems that he has no intention of participating in the grand tournament, so we'll have to capture him." Having said this, he seemed to sense something and looked off into the distance. Off in the distance, Yang Yanjun appeared, and in the blink of an eye, appeared in front of the two of them. He clasped his hands and said, "Fellow Taoists, I've been ordered to come here to help you deal with Yuanzong." He paused for a moment, then said, "Yang Yanjun knows that with your abilities, it won't be difficult to deal with Yuanzong. I hope you won't blame me for being meddlesome." How could Yang Miaosheng possibly blame him? In fact, she couldn't be happier. She cleared her throat, put on a serious expression, and said, "Since Yang Yanjun has arranged this, he must have his reasons." Fang Shen and didn't mind either. He had no enmity with Yuanzong, and had only come here because he had been entrusted by the elders of his sect. Since someone was willing to help him, why not? "It doesn't matter," he said. "With one more person, we'll have a better chance." The three of them discussed things for a moment, but didn't immediately attack. Instead, they sat down cross-legged. This was because people like Yuanzong had their own mysterious abilities. Not only did they know what was going to happen in the future, but they were also able to avoid danger in advance. Therefore, they needed to wait for Yang Yanjin's divination before they could act. After waiting for half a day, the sky suddenly broke, and a ray of spiritual light fell. Fang Xinan took the spiritual light in his hand. After taking a glance at it, he put it into his sleeve and said, "We need to quickly deal with this person. There are only 2 more days until the Battle of Spell's Grand Assembly. There seems to be an even more troublesome matter over there. Everyone, after we capture this person, we must hurry back as soon as possible." Chapter 2079. In Bu Su's Heaven Clear Huan Palace, Zhang Yan was not only unraveling the unknown to improve his cultivation, he was also trying to find the source of the magic power fluctuations in the void. If he could find it, then he could try to calm the chaos. But so far, there had been no results. Perhaps the other party's magic power was superior to his, or perhaps they were better at hiding, or perhaps they had both. In truth, if he wanted to, he could instantly calm the various changes in the myriad realms. But he wouldn't do that because if he did, then he would be taking the initiative to accept karma. Originally, the Whaley Master hadn't been deliberately targeting them. These were just other disturbances. But if he got involved, it would turn into a conflict between the two sides. Perhaps that was the other party's intention, so he would rather let the people of the myriad realms deal with it themselves. That way, it would be easier to calm things down. And it wasn't without its benefits. Now that the various sects had established themselves in Bu Su's Kanchi continent, it could be said that they were all in cahoots with one another. Because of the stirring of karma, it would be easier for the Zhou Huanyuan Jade to appear. However, he would keep an eye on the final barrier. If a true Yang cultivator was affected and couldn't distinguish themselves, then it wouldn't be too late to act to protect them. In Bu Su's Heaven Clear Huan, in the Drum Pillar Lesser Heaven, more than 10 cultivators were sitting around a stone ring of restriction. All of their auras were obscure, and only their silhouettes could be vaguely discerned. It could be seen that they were only clones that were reflected here. In the center of the stone ring sat 3 people, and it was obvious that they had the highest status. The person sitting in the highest position said, "Fellow Taoist, do you really want to do this? You need to think it over. In my opinion, there are more ways to deal with the mountain and sea realm. The Bu Su's Heaven Clear Huan has millions of years of experience. How can someone like that possibly catch up?" The person sitting in the highest position agreed. "That's right. The mountain and sea realm has an almighty true Yang cultivator watching over it. If we provoke that person, wouldn't we be seeking our own deaths? Since we're aware of the changes in the heavenly secrets, we just have to sit and wait. When the opportunity appears, we'll seize it in advance. It's too risky to do such a thing." The man on the heaven seat casually said, "You don't have to worry about this. If we succeed this time, we will succeed. Even if we fail, we won't be left behind. When the time comes, someone will come to receive us." Hearing her words, not only the 2 above the human position and status, but the rest of the people were also shocked. To be able to help me escape from Xinjiang Yuanzun, it can only be Xinjiang Yuanzun. "Could it be?" the person on the heaven seat said, "Since everyone has already guessed it, just be aware of it. Don't mention it to anyone else, lest the one from the Green Jade Palace sense it." The person with the higher status thought for a moment and said, "If that's the case, we can give it a try. When we get to the mountain and sea realm, we won't be discovered by those 2 divine monarchs like the others did." The heaven seat said, "Fellow Taoist, you're wrong. We won't have anyone to help us in the mountain and sea realm. We can only rely on ourselves." The person with the higher status was surprised. If we rely on ourselves, how can we avoid the 2 divine monarchs who guard the heaven realm? The heaven seat said, "Those 2 are actually manifestations of the aura of a certain Xinjiang Yuanzun after he died. They aren't the real Yuanzun." She pulled out an item. "This is a gift from the Exalted One. Anyone who goes to the mountain and sea realm with this item will not have to worry about being discovered." The person on the human position laughed and said, "Since we have such a treasure, why would we be so stingy?" The heaven seat looked around and said, "What do you think, everyone?" Everyone expressed their willingness to go with her. The heaven seat waved his sleeve and said, In that case, everyone, go back and make your preparations. Everyone stood up, cupped their fists, and vanished in the blink of an eye. After everyone had left, the Heaven Realm expert let out a long sigh and stood up from his original position. In the future she could see, the sects of the mountain and sea realm were flourishing and were expanding into the myriad heavens. Currently, all of the Taoist orthodoxies of the myriad heavens, with the exception of the Green Jade Palace and a few other sects that had ties to the mountain and sea realm, were gradually disappearing. That included her own sect. Most hateful of all was that the Green Jade Palace had not only failed to stop them, they had actually pushed them along. Furthermore, the disciples who would participate in the magical competition between the sects of the mountain and sea realm would undoubtedly be the cream of the crop. If they could inflict serious damage to the sects, then they would be able to alleviate the situation, or at least prevent it. However, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something wrong with her thinking. What did the rise and fall of the sects have anything to do with her? So what if the sects were destroyed? Even if the various sects of the mountain and sea realm had risen to prominence, they were still Tao cultivators. Someone with a cultivation base like hers would be treated with the same courtesy. Why would she do something like this? And even if she succeeded, would the Yuan Venerate of the mountain and sea realm just let her off the hook? That was a bit too much of a joke. Just what am I thinking about? Suddenly, she seemed to come to her senses. Looking around, she frowned and said, "Why is this clone of mine here?" However, no matter how she thought about it, she couldn't remember anything. Shaking her head helplessly, her body flickered, and she vanished without a trace. Outside of the eastern wastelands, above the boundless sea, Yuanzong hovered in midair, his face filled with exhaustion. He looked around at the talisman, his expression one of hatred. The spell formation was even more difficult to deal with than a spell formation disc. It was constantly changing, and was constantly shrinking. If he didn't want to be suppressed, he would have to go all out with his magic power to fight back against the pressure. However, doing that would drain him even more quickly. The only way he could do that was if he could break out of the spell formation in one go. Originally, he had a chance to do that, but just as he was about to make his move, he hesitated. Based on his cultivation base and energy, this shouldn't have happened. However, when he thought about it, he realized that his mind had been disturbed. He guessed that one of the three who had surrounded him was a cultivator from the spirit sect of the mountain and sea realm. That person had the ability to directly enter a person's mind and soul, which was why he had fallen into their trap. He couldn't help but hate his own carelessness. Originally, he had thought that with the blessing of the workings of the heavens, he would be able to predict any changes in the future. Even if there was danger, he would be able to prepare in advance. However, there had been no warning whatsoever that he had been surrounded. There was definitely an almighty upper realm expert involved. Only someone like that could do such a thing. Yang Miaoxing stood outside controlling the spell formation. Although her expression was solemn, she was inwardly very happy. She had come up with this spell formation by observing the erosion symbols, and could be considered to be her proudest work. However, whenever a new spell formation was created, in order to verify its power, she would first have to find a fellow Taoist to test it out. However, she couldn't use it to her heart's content, and she didn't want to trouble others all the time. But things were different now. As she operated the spell formation, there were two powerful fellow Taoists suppressing her from the side. She didn't have to worry about her opponent breaking out. She could use her techniques to her heart's content, and she could even make up for any mistakes she had made. This was comparable to what she had spent decades researching on her own. She had hoped that her opponent would be able to hold on for a bit longer. That way, she would be able to test out more of her ideas. Yuanzong understood that he wouldn't be able to hold on much longer if the talismans continued to wear him down. His fate of being captured was already set in stone. Thus, he didn't struggle and allowed the talismans to land on him. One by one, the talismans drilled into his body. Then he lost his spiritual energy and fell from the sky. Fang Xin inflicted his sleeve, and a beam of qi flew out and caught him. Yang Miaoxing saw this and muttered, "I still have a lot of energy." Yuanzong smiled coldly and looked at the three of them. Do you really think that things are over just because you've captured me? I'm not the only one who's seen the workings of the heavens. Fang Xin said indifferently, if one comes, I'll just take care of one. Yang Yanjun mocked, why are you talking so much with him? He's already a captive. Whatever happens next has nothing to do with him. Yang Miaoxing's eyes lit up. It's not over? She asked, how many people are there like you? Yu Wanzong sneered and said, countless. Yang Miaoxing was even happier. If it weren't for the other two Taoists, she really wanted to pat his shoulder and say, that's great. Fang Xin tossed out a cloud of light and took Yu Wanzong into it. Then he said, now that this is done, we'll return. There's still something waiting for us at Tianyue. The three of them took out their talismans at the same time and teleported to Tianyue in an instant. Just now, as they walked out of the light, they saw a middle-aged Taoist with a beautiful beard standing there. The three of them recognized him and went forward to greet him. Greetings, sect leader Xin. Shen Dong returned the greeting and said, since the three of you have returned, I guess you've captured Yu Wanzong. Fang Xin said, I'm about to send him to the main hall of Tianyue to report. Shen Dong nodded and said in a deep voice, this person has an unusual appearance. If he doesn't mess with the heavens and only seeks for opportunities to nourish himself, we can let him be. However, he's obsessed and only follows this path. He can't be considered a Taoist anymore. Fang Xin said, this person might have no choice. Yang Yanjun agreed and said, you're right, Taoist Fang. Some people actually had no choice. For example, in the future that someone saw, they would be killed by someone else in the end. Then, other than those with an indestructible heart, no matter who it was, they would definitely think of ways to avoid this outcome. It was impossible for them to not be affected. Also, if the person who killed you in the future was by your side, how would you react? If that person was your master, your disciple, or even the person closest to you, how would you treat them? It didn't matter to the disciples of the lower realm because even if they fought, they wouldn't cause too much damage. However, it was different for the cultivators of the upper realm, especially the Yuhuan heavens. There were many greater and lesser worlds and countless cultivators. The place that was most likely to have a problem was there. Usually, even if this person came, there were very few of them. Even if something happened, it wouldn't be hard to control them. However, it was the competition now, so it was impossible to stop everyone outside. Fang Xin cupped his hands and said, everyone, you've really waited for a long time. We need to go and report first, so we won't talk much with sect leader Xin. Shen Dong said expressionlessly, right now, there's something wrong in Tianyue. I've been waiting here for you because of this person. Can the three of you hand him over to me? I'll send him there. Fang Xin's expression froze. He looked at him and said slowly, no, since it's something that you've really entrusted to us, we should finish what we started. Sect leader Xin, don't you agree? Chapter 2080. On the Tianyue platform, Yang Yanjun and Yang Miaoxing also noticed that something was wrong. They looked at Shen Dong with vigilance. As a mortal shed true supreme, he had actually come here to wait for them. Moreover, it was only a few steps, yet he had requested for them to bring the person away. Something was wrong no matter how they looked at it. Could it be that this person, the two of them could not help but feel nervous? Although many mysteries had appeared, as far as they knew, it only involved Taoist Dong Tian at most. They had never heard of anyone being bewitched among the mortal shed true supreme. If the person in front of them was as they guessed, then it would be the worst-case scenario. They knew very well what kind of power a cultivator at this level had. If he really attacked them at this moment, it was impossible for them to resist. Even if there were other Taoist mortals in Tianyue, they might not be able to save them in time. Yang Miaoxing panicked and mumbled, this isn't fun anymore. Yang Yanjun, on the other hand, felt careless. If he had taken out the decree before returning to Tianyue, this would not have happened. Fang Xin stared at Shen Dong closely. If it was the worst situation, he would not just sit and wait for death even if there was a huge difference in their cultivation. Shen Dong fell silent for a moment. However, to everyone's surprise, he didn't insist. He just said in a deep voice, that's fine as well. Since fellow Taoists want to personally send him over, then I won't interfere. He flicked his sleeve and turned to leave. His figure gradually disappeared into the distance. Yang Yanjun and Yang Miaoxing could not help but feel relieved. Fang Xin reminded them, "The two of you, something is wrong. Now is not the time to relax. You should quickly return and report." The three of them quickly moved forward. Since there were restrictive formations everywhere, they could no longer travel through the air. Therefore, the deeper they went, the tighter the defense became. With the talismans in their hands, the three of them were unobstructed. In the end, they arrived before a towering pavilion. When the gatekeeper boy saw them, he hurriedly clasped his hands and said, "Greetings, Reverends. Shang Jinwei has instructed that if the three of you arrive, there's no need to wait. You can just go in and see him." When the three of them saw this, they didn't waste any time and entered the pavilion one after another. When they arrived at the inner courtyard, they saw Wei Zihong standing there. However, when they shifted their gazes, their hearts tightened. Shen Dong was actually standing there expressionlessly. Fang Xin came forward and bowed. "Sect Master Wei." Wei Zihong laughed and said, "Fellow Taoists, you may dispense with the formalities. Has Yuanzong obtained it?" Fang Xin shook his sleeve, and a cloud of light appeared above the hall. One could vaguely see the silhouette of a person within it. Wei Zihong swept a glance over and said, "Where's the formation spirit?" As he spoke, two figures flashing with golden light appeared above and said in unison, "We await your orders." Wei Zihong said, "Detain this person and take good care of him. Don't let anything happen to him. After the spell competition, we'll deal with him together." The two figures came up and dragged the cloud of light down. In an instant, the light in the hall shook, and then everything returned to normal. Wei Zihong looked at the three of them again and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoists, you've worked hard. I'll record down this merit and present it to you and Master for you to view." At this time, the three of them should have taken their leave. However, Fang Xin stood there and didn't move. He looked at Shen Dong and said, "I'd like to ask something. Just now, Sect Master Shen is asking me for the person. Is it out of your own will, or was it entrusted by Sect Master Wei?" Shen Dong said, "I don't know when Reverend Fang is talking about, but I've been discussing matters with fellow Taoist Wei just now and haven't left for even a moment." Wei Zihong asked, "What's going on?" Yang Yanjun walked up from the side and told them what had happened outside just now. "In other words, the three of you saw fellow Taoist Shin at the rooftop?" Wei Zihong's eyes focused and he waved his sleeves. In an instant, a light like a water mirror bloomed, and a scene appeared inside. It was when the three of them arrived. However, in the light, the three of them didn't stop for a moment after arriving at the rooftop. They went straight here and didn't meet anyone along the way. Yang Yanjun was startled and frowned. We clearly, Wei Zihong pondered for a moment and said, "How long have the three of you been fighting with Yuanzong? Did you encounter anything strange during that time?" Fang Xin said, "It's only been half a day. With our knowledge, we didn't notice anything wrong." Wei Zihong nodded and didn't say anything more. He only said, "The three of you must have used up some magic power after rushing all the way back. You can go and rest first. I'll give you an explanation for this matter." Seeing this, the three of them didn't stay any longer. After bowing, they left. When they were outside, Yang Yanjun said, "Fellow Taoist Fang, just now," Fang Xin shook his head and said, "I think we should just wait here and not go out again, in case something strange happens again." Yang Yanjun was deeply convinced. There was something strange about this matter. Was what they had seen just now an illusion, or was it really Shen Tong's doing? He couldn't figure it out now. Judging from Wei Zihong's attitude, it seemed that the three of them had some unsolved problem with their own bodies. It was better for them to stay here. At this time, he suddenly felt his sleeve being tugged. He looked over in surprise and found that it was Yang Miaoxing. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Fellow Taoist Yang, you..." Yang Miaoxing was short and could only look up at Yang Yanjun. She blinked and said, "Well, since there's nothing to do later, can I ask fellow Taoist to help me verify a talisman array?" Yang Yanjun had a feeling that it wasn't a good choice to directly agree. It was just that they were fighting side by side, and he didn't want to lose face. He nodded and said, "All right." Yang Miaoxing added, "Don't worry, I won't trouble you for too long." Yang Yanjun looked at her, sighed and said, "It's fine. I don't have anything to do for the time being." On Heaven Peak, all of the major sects had already been arranged. The Qinsong and Shaoqing sects had the highest positions, followed by the Netherspring sect, Anata sect, Blood Soul sect, Pingdu sect, Yuanying sect, Clear Feathers sect, Guangyuan sect, Lishan sect, and other sects of the 9 continents. After them were the 100 kingdoms of the eastern wastelands, the Heart Butterfly tribe, the 100 southern Civ continents, and the other natives of the mountain and sea realm. As for the various sects from beyond the heavens, they were on the opposite side of the mountain and sea realm. There was still one more day before the actual battle, but the seats were still empty. In fact, even if the day of the battle had arrived, it would only be a battle between lower-level cultivators. Thus, not all of the higher-level cultivators would come. Lu Zhipei stood there in a daze. "What is this place?" he asked in confusion. He breathed in and out, then looked shocked. This spiritual opportunity, how can it be so abundant? Even the sect's restricted areas can't compare to this. Although he had never been to the sect's restricted areas, he could sense that the amount of spiritual opportunity here far exceeded anything he had ever seen. In fact, it had reached an unimaginable level. Furthermore, his cultivation base was much higher than before. However, he soon realized that something was off. He tapped his forehead with his finger, and in the next moment, his soul seemed to leap out of his body, allowing him to see his current self. He was now a completely different person than he had been before. What was going on? He panicked. It was at this point that a few cultivators hurried by off in the distance, their clothing very similar to his own. Looking at them now, they seemed both unfamiliar and familiar. Lu Zhipei suddenly thought of something and searched his body for a moment before pulling out his clan's official seal and sect medallion. The official seal was inscribed with the name Yao Rubin, and the medallion was inscribed with the words Yaoyin. The Yaoyin clan? Lu Zhipei's eyes went wide. The Yaoyin clan was one of the 12 immortal sects in the myriad of worlds. How could he have become a disciple of the Yaoyin? Didn't that mean no? What he needed to do now was figure out exactly where he was and what his identity was. If he wasn't careful and his fellow sect members saw through his disguise, it wouldn't end well for him. He quickly scanned the area and was able to detect 2 weak auras. He walked over to them and soon found 2 Taoist attendants. From his robe, they could tell that he was a Yaoyin cultivator and were very respectful toward him. Lu Zhipei quickly asked a few questions. Perhaps it was because of his current identity, but no one seemed to suspect anything. It didn't take long for him to understand the situation. The mountain and sea realms grand competition? After finding out what was going on, he stood there in shock. Of the 12 great immortal sects that he knew of, roughly 9 of them originated from the mountain and sea realm. The spiritual energy there was flourishing, far beyond the meager spiritual energy of the outer realms. Only the elites of the sects were qualified to come here to practice cultivation and offer greetings. In the entire realm, there were no more than 100 people who had such good fortune. For the sake of those 100 spots, the various sects would often fight tooth and nail. As far as he knew, the last grand competition for the mountain and sea realms grand competition had occurred 90,000 years ago. Had he actually traveled 90,000 years ago? After finding out the truth, he was both terrified and excited. Clearly, this was an incredible opportunity. Suddenly, his face went pale. In the past, the mountain and sea realm had held a grand assembly of grand magical battles. However, there had been one that had been different. It was the one that he remembered the most clearly. During that grand assembly, something unforeseen had occurred, which had given rise to a series of events. His heart began to pound nervously. Could it be that this was the one? The 2 Taoist attendants saw that he seemed to be in a daze and didn't know what was going on. One of them asked, "Fellow Taoist, is there something you need?" Lu Zhipei came to his senses and forced a smile onto his face. "It's nothing," he said. "Many thanks, fellow Taoists." I have other matters to attend to, so I won't bother you any longer. After saying his goodbyes, he walked off to a secluded corner, where he tried to recall what had happened. Then he used a teleportation spell formation to go around the various sects' encampments. Finally, he returned, his expression extremely unsightly. As of this moment, he was certain that the unforeseen events that had occurred in his memories had occurred in this grand competition. Some of the events that had occurred after that were merely rumors. As for the truth, other than those who had personally experienced it, it would be difficult for anyone to say for sure. However, there was one thing that was certain, and that was that during the competition, many lower realm disciples had been injured or killed. Even almighty experts had been defeated. Considering his current core transformation cultivation base, 90,000 years after the decline of spiritual opportunity, he would be considered a powerful figure. But right now, he was no better than an ant that could be trampled to death. If he could, he would rather stay as far away as possible. However, he knew that although he was an ordinary disciple, there was no way he could get out of the restrictive spells that surrounded Heaven Peak. In order to save himself, he had to think of a way to stop what was happening. After a bit of thought, he came up with an idea. Oh yes, I'm a disciple of the Yaoyin sect. I remember that when this happened, the leader of the Yaoyin clan, Wei Zihong, was also here. If I make an excuse to meet him, I might have a chance to meet him. In his memory, 90,000 years later, this person was still in charge of the Yaoyin sect. She was also one of the few people who remained unscathed in this incident. But even if he could really meet her, how to gain her trust was also a problem. But now he had no other choice. He could only try to take this path. Chapter 2081. After Lu Jipei thought about it, he was about to find his fellow sect members, but just now he was about to move, but he stopped. He suddenly thought, what excuse could he use to say these things? Could it be that he woke up from a dream and obtained the memory of 90,000 years later? After all, there seemed to be many people whose souls had been infected in this unforeseen event. What if they took him to be such a person? What should he do then? Thinking about this, he couldn't help but hesitate. In fact, if he just randomly found an excuse and told the truth when he saw sect leader Wei Zihong, it was not impossible. He believed that with Wei Zihong's cultivation and knowledge, he would be able to tell whether what he said was true or false. The scary thing was that before he saw the sect leader, he would be stopped. This was very possible, especially now that he didn't know anyone from the sect. In the eyes of the elders, it was very suspicious. If he was imprisoned for 10 days or half a month, he wouldn't even have a place to run. Then he wouldn't be trying to save himself, he would be seeking death. At this time, a cultivator came over. Seeing that he was standing still, he asked curiously, "Junior Martial Brother Yao, what are you doing here? Have you finished the things that Martial Uncle asked you to do?" Lu Jipei came back to his senses and hurriedly said, "I haven't finished yet." The cultivator kindly said, "Then you have to hurry. Starting from the day after tomorrow, all the sect's spiritual masters will be coming here one after another. If there is any delay, you will be punished." Lu Jipei lowered his head and said, "Yes, Senior Martial Brother." The cultivator felt that he was a little strange today, but there were many disciples of the Yaoyin clan. He and Lu Jipei weren't familiar before, he just happened to pass by and reminded him, so he didn't think too much about it, and he still had a lot of things to do. Lu Jipei let out a sigh of relief, but after this matter, he was even more afraid to go to the upper echelons of the sect. But if he didn't take this path, what should he do? After thinking about it, his eyes suddenly lit up. He thought of a way. When he was talking with the two deacon Taoists, he knew from them that he was acting as the deacon here. He was responsible for the expenses and cultivation needs of the disciples of each sect during the entire Battle of Spells Grand Gathering, and even managing the various matters of welcoming and sending people. The most convenient thing about this identity was that it allowed him to come into contact with the disciples of various sections. As far as he knew, after this incident, other than some upper realm cultivators, there were also many lower realm disciples who survived. Many of these people would become famous in the future, and their current cultivation levels were not high. As long as they were with these people when the incident happened, Their chances of survival were not small. The only problem now was who to look for. Because of his identity, it was impossible for him to stay with these people all the time. He had to get in touch with them before anything happened. After repeatedly searching through the memories in his mind, he had a few candidates in mind. The first choice was a disciple of the Huanjin Temple. The Huanjin Temple would be one of the 12 celestial sects in the future. This time, the headmaster Zhang Zhen would come personally and had protected many people during the incident. As long as he could befriend this disciple and stay together during the incident, then at the crucial moment he would be protected together. The next choice was the 2 disciples of the Shaoqing sect. Although they were only core formation cultivators now, they would become enlightened masters in the future. Actually, these 2 were the easiest to get close to because the Shaoqing sect disciples never avoided challenges from their peers. So as long as you took the initiative to invite them to battle, they would definitely accept it gladly. They would not care if you were trying to make a name for yourself or for some other purpose. The last choice was to befriend a disciple of the Pingyuan sect. Any one of them was fine, as long as he could hide in their base before the incident happened. Although the Pingyuan sect was only a second-rate sect, for some reason, no one from the top to the bottom of the sect was injured. This was because they had preserved their vitality. Although they would not be one of the 12 celestial sects after 90,000 years, they could still be considered a large sect. However, he had only heard rumors about this, and it was difficult to determine whether it was true or not. So, he placed this choice as the last. After figuring this out, he felt much more relaxed. At least he still had a few ways out. In the next half a day, he quietly obtained the names of a few nearby disciples from the steward Taoist around him. He also tried to interact with them for a while, but he did not reveal any flaws. On the second day, when he was checking the pills and medicines in the storehouse, he saw a ray of light flying towards him. He immediately grabbed it in his hand, but before he could react, he felt a thought drilling into his mind. It was the sect elder telling him that a big sect leader had arrived. He was told to temporarily put down what he was doing and go greet the sect leader together with him. He immediately handed the matter over to the steward Taoist while he went to the rendezvous point. He followed a sage-like Taoist with fluttering robes through the transfer formation and arrived at the edge of the heavenly mountain. Looking at the sea of clouds around him, he sighed. Although it seemed like he could get out of this place with just a few steps, in reality, he was within the range of the restriction. It was impossible for him to escape alone. After a brief moment, the clouds parted, and a 3,000-meter-tall pagoda emerged from the sea of clouds. The pagoda was supported by beautiful clouds, and jade smoke and white mist floated above the eaves. The music of golden drums and chanting could also be heard. Pingdu sect. Lu Zhipei thought about it carefully. He knew very little about this sect. Apart from knowing that it would be a large sect in the future, he did not have any memories related to it. Therefore, he let go of his thoughts and admired the magnificent scene that was rarely seen in the future. The sect leader of Pingdu sect, Ni Tianping, stood at the top of the pagoda and looked at the misty heavenly mountain in front of him. However, he had a deep expression on his face, and his eyebrows were knitted together as if he had something on his mind. Behind him, a trusted elder came up to the pagoda and bowed. Sect leader, Ni Tianping asked without turning his head, "What's the matter?" Elder Daoran answered, "Sect leader, they're getting restless again. They're provoking us everywhere." Ni Tianping said, "Let them be. There's no need to respond. Don't let outsiders laugh at us before the competition." Elder Daoran replied, "Yes, I'll try my best to appease them." Ni Tianping said, "Elder Kai, I'll have to trouble you for now. This matter has to be resolved eventually. Otherwise, even if Pingdu sect is in the limelight for now, we may not be able to stand side by side with the other sects in the future." Elder Kai said angrily, "What sect leader said is right, but some people just don't understand the bigger picture." Pingdu sect's techniques were completely reliant on the hidden zodiac pagoda. Success came from the pagoda, and failure came from the pagoda. Since there were only a few Dharma spirits in the pagoda, it meant that there were only a few cultivators who could achieve something in the sect. Moreover, there was only one person who could really reach the upper mortal shedding state. Now, with the help of abundant spiritual opportunity and countless external objects, the sect's strength had greatly increased. It was foreseeable that their power would become even more powerful in the future. However, if Pingdu sect only held on to the hidden zodiac pagoda, then there would be no more potential to speak of. Therefore, after Ni Tianping took over the sect, he started from scratch. He gradually separated the basic techniques of the disciples from the pagoda, and used the Dharma spirits as supernatural powers instead of relying on their lives. However, the elders in the sect who relied on the Dharma spirits had always been obstructing this. Therefore, the sect was now vaguely divided into two factions. Ni Tianping sighed and said, "Our ancestors obtained this pagoda only to borrow it to use techniques, not to pass on techniques. This was originally not for Pingdu sect, but after thousands of years, the primary and secondary have been reversed. Isn't it sad?" Elder Kai Daoren said, "Fortunately, sect leader is still around. Pingdu sect still has hope of breaking away from this shackle." Ni Tianping shook his head. Actually, this arrangement had already been made by the previous two generations of sect leaders. When Qi Hongchan was still in power, he thought that relying on the hidden zodiac pagoda would definitely drag the sect down. Although he had the intention to do so, until he passed away, the conditions were not ripe. When the sect fell into Wu Wei's hands, he followed this aspiration and gradually nurtured a batch of disciples who left the pagoda, including him. However, the cultivators who occupied the Dharma spirits were still the most powerful in the sect because their strength grew faster. If he was not the sect leader and had a righteous status, he would not be able to suppress them at all. Back then, Wu Wei did not take him in as a disciple, but a disciple on behalf of his master. It was to be able to control these people in terms of seniority. In the conservative faction, there was an elder whose cultivation was extremely similar to his. Now, it was time to see who would be able to sever their mortal body first. If he was one step ahead, then Pingdu sect could gradually break away from relying on the Dharma spirits in the future, and everything would proceed as he had planned. However, if that elder succeeded first, then the hard work of 3 generations of sect leaders would very likely be in vain. This grand meeting was actually a continuation of this competition. Whichever side performed better would very likely be able to win the hearts of the middle-level and lower-level disciples. However, this was not the only reason he came here. In his heart, he faintly felt that in this competition, there seemed to be a fortuitous encounter for him to advance to the upper realm. At this time, the Pingdu sect suddenly heard melodious music. After a while, waves of fragrance wafted over. Ni Tianping looked towards the source of the music and saw countless colorful petals dancing under the magnificent sunlight. Every petal was exquisite and gorgeous. In the incense array, a 10,000-foot cloud raft flew over. It was surrounded by colorful butterfly knots, and the clouds were wrapped in bells. The clear music was pleasing to the ears, and the wind ruffled the skirt, making it look exquisite. A heroic-looking woman in a Taoist robe with a high bun stood on the raft. Behind her were maids holding treasured fans, incense burners, jade bottles, and silver cups. Behind them was the 100-flower envoy with a blue lantern. This woman also saw Ni Tianping's Dharma carriage. She bowed from afar and said, "Sect leader Ni." Ni Tianping recognized that this was the Li Mountain sect leader Yun Suan. He bowed in the pagoda and said, "Sect leader Yun." Yun Suan looked at him and said, "Fellow Taoist, your fortuitous encounter is coming. Perhaps it won't be long before you can come to your sect to congratulate us." Ni Tianping said humbly, "Whether it is success or failure, it all depends on luck." Yun Suan said, "Not so. The disciples of the sect talk about fate and luck, but we are all respected elders of the sect. We can only succeed, not fail. If we advance, the world will be wide open. If we retreat, we will be beyond redemption." Her voice was firm, and anyone could hear that it contained a will that wouldn't allow her to retreat. Ni Tianping thought about how when the Li Mountain sect first entered the mountain and sea realm, it was ranked last among the great sections. It did not even have a single heaven's abode. It could only rely on its past friendship with the other sects to survive, and it could fall to the second rate at any time. But now it had survived. Yun Suan had become immortal, and the Li Mountain sect had become a great sect, even above the Pingdu sect. When he thought about this, he secretly made up his mind. It seemed that when it came to this fortuitous encounter, he had to search for it with all his might. He could not afford to be careless. Chapter 2082. The chariots of Mount Li and Pingdu sect quickly arrived at the edge of Heaven Peak. Ji, who was waiting on the platform, led a group of disciples to welcome them. At this time, the sunset glow spread down from the distant horizon. The fire was wrapped in gold, and the sky was dyed red. All of them were cultivators, so they noticed a trace of unusualness with a single glance. They saw a strand of crimson red drifting within the rays of light, yet it merely persisted for a few breaths of time before swiftly dispersing, and it caused them to wonder if they were seeing things. A few highly skilled Taoists did not shift their gazes away. After a while, the clouds parted and a huge jade altar floated in the sky. It slowly moved towards the direction of Tianyue. A Daoran turned his head and said to a fellow disciple beside him, "The chariot of the Blood Soul Sect's sect master Su has arrived. I still have 2 sect masters here to greet, so I'll have to trouble junior brother to greet this one on my behalf." The Taoist agreed and called out. Dozens of disciples, including Lu Jipei, followed him through the formation door and came to another platform on Heaven Peak. Not long after, the large jade altar was sent by Heaven Peak's restrictions, and it landed on the platform. The jade altar's restrictive light was released, and a handsome young Taoist with jade-like skin and dressed in a crimson-black robe walked out. It was the Blood Soul Sect's sect master, Su Muqing. Although he was a member of the spirit sect, his surroundings were filled with celestial music and spiritual light. Not only did he not have the slightest smell of blood, he even seemed like a celestial being. Lu Jipei looked at this person, and his heart was filled with a faint sense of excitement. 90,000 years later, this person and the 2 previous sect masters only existed in legends. With his status, he could not come into contact with such people, but now he was right in front of him. The leading Taoist waited for the people of the Blood Soul sect to come down from the altar before bowing and saying a few words. Then he made an inviting gesture, and the Blood Soul sect cultivators followed him through the formation door, heading towards the sect's encampment. Just as Lu Jipei was about to follow, a fellow disciple with the surname Zheng walked over and stopped him, saying, "Senior brother Yao, Uncle Master needs to welcome sect leader Su, so he can't leave for the time being. Just now, after receiving the documents, there will be a few small sects arriving. Uncle Master said that you'll be in charge of welcoming them." Lu Jipei knew that the original owner of this body could only be considered average, but he was willing to work hard without complaint. It just so happened that the disciples who came this time were all unfamiliar with him, so they intentionally or unintentionally gave him many arduous and unrewarding tasks to do. However, he wished for nothing more than to stay further away from his fellow disciples so as to avoid being seen through. Moreover, being able to come into contact with the various sects was exactly what he desired at the moment. Thus he said, "Junior brother, don't worry. Leave this place to me." Fellow disciple surnamed Zheng smiled and said, "Then I'll have to trouble senior brother. I know that senior brother likes wine. Just now, Uncle Master has given me a jar of spirit wine from sect leader Su. I'll treat senior brother to a drink some other day." Lu Jipei did not expect this. It was already good enough that he could survive this calamity, so he did not dare to hope for anything else. However, after knowing that he actually liked wine, he had to put on a happy expression so that the other party would not see through him. After a while, the sky gradually darkened. Countless fluorescent lights floated above the mountain, and for a moment, bright light flickered everywhere, shining with the river of stars that spanned across the sky. Although it was already night, there were still sects of various sizes arriving one after another. Because Lu Jipei had made sufficient preparations in advance and had the help of experienced deacons, he did not make any mistakes. When dawn arrived, the Pingyuan sect that he was waiting for also arrived. Although he had been here for an entire night to welcome and send them off, as a cultivator, he did not feel tired. Instead, after knowing that the sect had arrived, his spirit was lifted. However, at this time, the uncle master that he had not seen for an entire night appeared with a group of disciples. Compared to the many large sects, the Pingyuan sect could be said to be inconspicuous. However, after all, it was from the 9 continents and was also a lower sect of the Qinsong school like the Yaoyin sect. Therefore, the deacon elder had no choice but to personally come out to welcome them. It was just that the welcoming sects could make friends with quite a few handsome peers, and those who were in charge of escorting them could also obtain quite a few good things. Everyone was naturally very willing, but a small sect like Pingyuan could not take out such a large sum of money. Therefore, after sending the cultivators of the Pingyuan sect to the encampment, not many were willing to pay attention to them. One could not blame these disciples for being snobbish. Most of these people were here for the rewards and cultivation resources. Just now, they were here to be the deacons. If there were no benefits, they would rather hide in the sect and cultivate. When Lu Jipei saw this, he was secretly happy. Since everyone was not here, he could build a relationship with the Pingyuan sect. No matter what, this was a way out. If other places did not work, then this would be a life-saving straw. However, after spending less than half a day with the disciples of the Pingyuan sect, he felt that the entire sect was filled with a sense of lethargy. It was very different from the flourishing appearance of the other sections. He thought to himself, no wonder 90,000 years later, even though Pingyuan was ranked as a large sect, it was still at the bottom. At the same time, it was also strange. How did such a sect escape this unforeseen event? Could it be that the rumors were not true? Thinking of this, he could not sit still anymore. Just as he was about to find an excuse to leave, a voice sounded, "Senior brother, so you're here. It took me a long time to find you." Lu Jipei took a look and saw that it was his fellow disciple surnamed Zheng. He said, "Junior brother, why are you here again?" Fellow disciple surnamed Zheng said apologetically, "Senior brother, I came here because I have something to trouble you with." Lu Jipei said, "Junior brother, what are you talking about? If there's anything, just say it." Fellow disciple surnamed Zheng said gratefully, "Just now, 2 loose cultivators have come from the Yuhuan heavens. They clearly don't belong to any sect, but they are very arrogant. They asked all sorts of questions the moment they arrived and even stretched out their hands to ask for a lot of good things. However, they are guests from afar, and as the host, we can't treat them badly. It's just that Uncle Master has called me over to do something, so I really can't take care of them. I can only ask Senior Brother to take my place." Yuhuan heavens? Loose cultivators? Lu Jipei's heart tightened. He wanted to refuse, but fellow disciple surnamed Jing did not give him a chance to refuse. After he finished speaking, he immediately stuffed the talisman into his hand and left in a hurry. Lu Jipei had no choice but to summon a dozen servants and maidservants. Then, he turned the talisman and opened the array door. When he stepped through, he found himself in front of a cave. This was an extremely remote corner, deserted. There were not many people coming and going. His fellow disciple surnamed Jing must have deliberately arranged for him to stay here. He calmed his mind and came to the door. He lightly knocked on the jade latch and said, "Fellow Taoists, I am in charge of this place. If you need anything, please tell me." After a while, a bone-chilling voice came from inside. "We have nothing to disturb you. We still have homework to do, so you may leave." Lu Jipei's heart relaxed slightly. As far as he knew, this incident had something to do with the cultivators of the Yuhuan heavens. Maybe the person inside had participated in it. It was better not to meet him. He immediately left with his people and returned to the place where his fellow disciples were discussing matters. However, it was empty and he could not help but be surprised. He found a steward to ask and found out that the people of the 100 nations of the eastern wilderness had arrived. Because these people came from various vassal states, many people were sent to greet them. He thought for a while. The 100 nations of the eastern wilderness should be the eastern wilderness sect 90,000 years later. However, they had long abandoned the path of mystic cultivators. They specialized in Qi Dao. These people and the demon cultivators of the 100 South Sea continent did not need too much attention. Because in this incident, The disciples of these two sects suffered the most casualties, so there was no need to pay too much attention to them. Soon, another 2 days passed. Anatta Temple, Clear Feather Sect, Yuan Shen Sect, and other sects also arrived one after another. Seeing this, Lu Jipei wanted to find the official disciple of Anatta Temple and build a relationship with him. However, these were all large sects, so there were people from the same sect who went up to take care of matters. It was not his turn. Just as he was thinking about how to go up to them, an opportunity was placed in front of him. He occasionally learned that there was a disciple of Anatta Temple who was very difficult to talk to. He was very picky about everything. A few stewards who dealt with him could not stand his temper. However, this person had a high status in Anatta Temple. It was said that he was an elite in the sect, so it was not good to ignore him. After hearing this, Lu Jipei's heart shook. He thought that this person was very likely to be the person he was looking for, so he volunteered. Seeing him like this, the steward elder was deeply gratified. He said pleasantly, "Ever since you arrived, I have seen everything that you have done. Although you did not receive any benefits, the sect cannot mistreat a diligent disciple like you. When we return, I will naturally record this merit for you." Lu Jipei showed a look of gratitude and said, "Thank you, Uncle Master." After he got the talisman, he passed through the array door and came to the door of another cave. At this moment, he heard a voice coming from inside. "What tea is this?" Not to mention the lack of spirituality in the leaves, even the water used to make the tea is not Tianlin. Is this how the steward and steward do things? He hurriedly walked in. He saw a Taoist in a neat robe sitting on the couch. His hair was tied up with a golden crown. He had red lips and white teeth. He had a handsome face, and a steward Taoist was smiling at him. The servants on both sides did not dare to raise their heads. Lu Jipei went forward and bowed. "Taoist friend, please do not blame me. If there is anything wrong, I will apologize first." The young Taoist looked over and said, "Who are you?" Before Lu Jipei could speak, he waved his sleeve. "You are unaccountably solicitous. You are definitely not a good person. Get out. Don't come and talk to me." Lu Jipei finally understood why the others in front of him could not stand this person. He took a breath and said seriously, "Taoist friend, why do you say that? I am Tianyue's steward, and now I am in charge of the secular affairs here. It is my duty to ask about this matter, not to curry favor with you." The young Taoist snorted and said, "Don't lie to me. The stewards in front of me are not willing to stay here for long, but you insist on coming here. One look and I can see that you have an ulterior motive. I hate people like you the most." Lu Jipei listened to his words. Although he was not moved on the surface, he was angry in his heart. What was more angry was that the other party was right. He did come with an ulterior motive. He tried to ease the atmosphere again, but it was useless. No matter what they did, the other party would find fault with them. Moreover, what they said was reasonable and not without reason. It was as if this person had the ability to see through the truth. After half a day, he could not take it anymore and could only retreat in a sorry state. But when he thought of the young Taoist's face of disdain, he was also very depressed. He sighed. "Forget it, it seems that this path is not going to work. I can only think of a way from Shaoqing. Shaoqing is one of the top sects and can be said to have strict rules. I think the disciples in the sect should not have such a temper." Chapter 2083. Wei Zihong stood in the middle of Heaven Peak Temple, looking at the glowing light that filled the temple. The light illuminated all of Heaven Peak Temple's buildings, all of its ponds, all of its waterside pavilions, and even all of its remote corners. Because of the differing levels of the cultivators' auras, the strange phenomena that appeared were also different. Those with high levels of cultivation were mysterious and profound, while those with low levels of cultivation were as faint as mist. Because the cultivators of the various sects and clans of the mountain and sea realm and the cultivators from beyond the heavens were all gathered together, it was not difficult to see that although the cultivators from the outer realms had the upper hand in terms of the number of upper realm cultivators, when it came to cultivation bases and techniques, the majority of the stronger cultivators were on the side of the mountain and sea realm. That was especially true of the lower realm cultivators. Because of that, compared to the sects and clans of the outer realms, the only thing the sects and clans of the mountain and sea realm lacked in resources, if given enough time, the mountain and sea realm cultivators would rise to prominence. However, the more he watched, the more he got the feeling that conflict was about to rise. In the past, the cultivators of the Tao had always fought over external objects of the Tao. However, now that they no longer lacked external objects, they fought over the legacy of their Taoist teachings and doctrines. The truth was that this conflict had begun long before the various heavenly realms had been able to communicate with each other. If one's vision wasn't high enough, they might not even have noticed it. At the moment, it seemed that among the cultivators of the same level, there were no sects or clans whose Taoist magics were superior to those of the other heavenly realms. Therefore, the conflict wasn't very obvious. However, as time went on, and the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm grew stronger, it was likely that there would be more conflicts. His gaze shifted to the corner of the temple, where the rogue cultivators from beyond the heavens resided. Logically speaking, their magical power and aura shouldn't be able to match up to the cultivators of the great sections. However, that wasn't the case. Many of their auras were comparable to the sect leaders of the great sections. Originally, their residences had been scattered, making it impossible to tell much about them. However, now that the shield was visible, it was clear. He snorted. How could there be so many rogue cultivators who had cultivated to this level and had all come here? Among these people, there must have been quite a number of cultivators from sects who had come here with a different identity. After all, there were many large and small worlds in the Yuhuan heavens, and cultivators of the upper realms could be found everywhere. It would be difficult to find out the origins of any one of them. At this moment, Shen Dong walked in from outside the hall and stood beside him. He said in a deep voice, "I have some clues about the matter that fellow Taoist entrusted me to investigate." Wei Zihong knew he was talking about Fang Xin and the others bumping into him. He turned around and said, "What is the reason?" Shen Tong said, "Because of the reversal of fate and karma, there will be qi activity wandering in the past and future. If a mighty person sees it, he can use my qi activity to act. Therefore, what the three Taoists saw that day can be said to be me, but it can also be said not to be me." Wei Zihong pondered for a moment. If this was man-made, then the person who could do such a thing was not simple. At least, it was difficult for him to think so. Therefore, the mastermind behind this was at least above him. His expression couldn't help but become slightly solemn. If it was like this, then he couldn't take it lightly. Just think about it, if his own qi was disturbed and moved by someone, then the disciples below him would probably not be able to distinguish it at all. The good news here was that it was just a wisp of qi activity, and it could not have the original owner's ability. Once discovered, he could easily get rid of it. However, the bad news was that even a wisp of qi activity of an upper realm mortal could similarly kill all lower realm cultivators. Fortunately, there was no need to be afraid of not knowing anything. After understanding the whole story, they could also have a plan to deal with it and try to put an end to it. Even if it did not succeed, they had to reduce the possible losses to the minimum. He said, "Now that fellow Taoists from various sects are here, if someone causes trouble, it will be extremely difficult to tell. Therefore, we have to lock the qi activity and not let it be used by others." Shen Tong said, "Should we ask for instructions from the Grand Elder?" Wei Zihong shook his head. "There is nothing in the world that can be hidden from Master. However, Master has not said anything this time, so I presume he must have his reasons. We should just focus on our own matters. If we had to rely on Master for everything, then what would be the point of us?" Shen Tong said in a low voice, "The grand tournament of magical techniques has begun. If we just rely on ourselves, I'm afraid we won't even have a chance to come up with a proper solution. We can think of a solution from the outside." Wei Zihong's interest was piqued. "What solution does fellow Taoist Shen have?" Shen Tong said, "The Green Jade Palace uses karma as a reward. As long as karma is used as a reward, we should be able to quickly find a solution." Wei Zihong thought about it, then nodded. This method was quite feasible. Over the years, the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm had accumulated quite a bit of karma in order to make things easier for them in the myriad heavens. Now was the time to use them. He smiled. This time, there are quite a few people with ulterior motives from the myriad heavens. This can be considered as using their own spears to attack their own shields. Shen Tong said, "As of now, we've found all the mysterious people with some cultivation base. However, they are at most in the paradise stage. Beyond that, there is no way to investigate. There are also some small fish among the lower realm cultivators who have slipped through the net." Wei Zihong waved his hand. "There's no need to worry about those lower realm cultivators. They have seen very few things and their abilities are limited. Just consider it their own destiny." After coming into contact with those cultivators with mysterious bodies, he was able to see that even though the karma of the heavens was in chaos, causing some people to obtain benefits, but what a person could see was related to their cultivation and potential. Cultivators below the paradise stage, regardless of their cultivation base, could only see a few hundred years into the future. As long as they didn't do anything stupid, Shen Tong would allow them to exist. Shen Tong didn't have any intention of being strict with these disciples. Just now, he was only mentioning them in passing. There was nothing wrong with them now. Wei Zihong continued, "However, those upper realm cultivators who have seen the visions of the future cannot be ignored. Also, those from the outer realms must know that the sects of the mountain and sea realm are not to be trifled with." He looked at Shen Tong and said, "Fellow Taoist, please come with me." After saying that, he waved his sleeve, and a formation door suddenly opened in front of him. He stepped inside, and Shen Tong followed behind him. Looking around, he saw that it was a vast immortal's cave, and there were many psychic jade walls erected on both sides. Wei Zihong walked to the center and stood still. In the blink of an eye, several rays of spiritual light flew to the jade walls on both sides. Spiritual light flickered on the 3 jade discs on the left side, and 3 figures emerged from each of them. Shen Tong looked over. Although the figures were blurry, it wasn't difficult to recognize them. Qinsong School Daylight Hall Master Huixian. Qinsong School Duzhen Hall Left Hall Master Ning Chongxian. Qinsong School Upper Extreme Hall Protector Lu Junyang. Almost at the same time, 3 rays of spiritual light appeared on the jade wall on the right side. Shaoqing Sects Qin Chenzi, Ran Xiushu, and Sun Huaying appeared one after another. Shaoqing Sect's Transforming Sword, Extreme Sword, and Killing Sword were 3 branches of the sword sect, and each of them represented one of them. Among them, Qin Chenzi was the candidate for the next sect master, and his status was especially high. However, unlike Qinsong School, Sect Master Qin had completely handed over the sect's authority to Qi Yuntian after going into closed-door cultivation. Mengjin only assisted him from the side. And after Yu Xianshao went into closed-door cultivation not long ago, his disciple Ing Chuanqiu was still in charge of the sect on his behalf. However, most of the Shaoqing sect's disciples were unwilling to pay too much attention to mundane matters, so they did this to not distract Qin Chenzi and allow him to focus on cultivation. When Wei Zihong saw the 6 of them, he immediately bowed and said, "Greetings, everyone." The 6 figures also bowed in return. After Wei Zihong finished bowing, he said, "Everyone, I have investigated clearly these few days. There are enemies from beyond the heavens who want to take advantage of the mountain and sea realms competition to cause trouble in our realm." Sun Huaying's eyes lit up, and she asked, "Where did the enemies come from?" Wei Zihong replied, "Most of them are from the Yuhuan heavens." He paused for a while and then said, "There seems to be a demon behind this." Ran Xiushu came to a realization and she said, "So there is a demon behind this. No wonder, no wonder." Originally, he was very puzzled. The Yuhuan heavens seemed to have no reason to do this, and it was also very baffling. Even if they succeeded, what benefits would they gain? But if there was a demon behind this, then there was a reasonable explanation. The human Dao sects were fighting each other, and no matter which side won or lost, it was considered a good thing for the demon cultivators. He changed his mind and said, "I heard that there are many demons and demons in this competition. Speaking of which, we need to keep a close eye on them." Wei Zihong suggested, I heard that the Anata Temple's current techniques can distinguish the cause and the origin. Why don't we ask sect leader Zhang to come and ask him? Perhaps there is a way. Hua Xian immediately agreed, we can give it a try. Ning Chongxian said, I have no objections. Qin Chenzi said in a low voice, then please ask sect leader Zhang of the Anata Temple to come and discuss this matter. At the same time, within the half-realm, there was a skyscraping palace. The owner of the palace was an ordinary-looking middle-aged Taoist. He looked at a disciple hurrying down the stage and asked, How is it? When can we go and close the gate? The disciple said, Forgive me, sect uncle. I don't want to enter and exit the mountain and sea realm to close the gate. It's much stricter than before, so I'll have to trouble sect uncle to wait a little longer. Then he asked worriedly, Could it be that the mountain and sea realm has already sensed something? The Taoist replied indifferently, There's no harm in that. The mountain and sea realm's foundation is shallow, and they don't even have a single cultivator who has reached enlightenment. There's no way they wouldn't be able to sense something like this. It's normal for them to be on guard. If they act calm and collected, it'll only make things worse. Regardless, the grand tournament can't be stopped. He chuckled. This time, we're coming with absolute power. Even if he wants to, he won't be able to stop us. The disciple hesitated for a moment, then said, Sect uncle, I've heard that the mountain and sea realm has Yuan Zun backing them. What if he interferes? The middle-aged Taoist said meaningfully, Why do you think we would dare to do something like this, and why do we dare to say such things? If Almighty Yuan Zun wants to keep an eye on us, he can sense every word and action of anyone other than his own generation. In that case, I'm afraid we'd be captured before we could even finish what we were doing. Since nothing has happened, that means he's being held up by something. Therefore, you can tell my junior brother to hurry up and bring his people here. If he's too late, I won't leave much for him. Chapter 2084. The middle-aged Taoist waited for an indeterminable amount of time before the disciple finally came to report. Sect uncle, he said, it's time for us to pass. However, the cultivator from the mountain and sea realm wants to ask us a few questions. I wonder. Let him come up, said the middle-aged Taoist. The disciple said yes, and before long, a Taoist steward appeared. He bowed respectfully and said, Mountain and Sea Realm Taoist cultivator Che Ming offers greetings, exalted true. I am the steward here, and the sect has instructed that anyone who passes through the great gate of the two realms must be questioned. I hope exalted true won't take offense. What do you wish to know? Asked the Taoist steward. Dare I ask your true name, exalted true? Which realm do you come from? Which sect do you practice cultivation from? The middle-aged Taoist narrowed his eyes. Stone smashing heaven, tower enclosure sect, Mount Lianji. The Taoist steward produced a booklet from his sleeve, wrote something down, and then handed it over. Greetings, exalted true. Exalted true, please use your seal. Lianji Shan sat there motionlessly as a seal flew out. Spiritual light shone down onto the booklet, leaving a mark on it. He knew that by leaving a mark, he would be able to use it to find his own foundation. However, he wasn't afraid. The workings of heaven had long since been concealed, and the people of the mountain and sea realm wouldn't be able to see anything. The Taoist steward put away the booklet, clasped his hands, and said, Exalted True has been waiting for a long time. We will now open the great gate of the two realms. There's something I have to say, he said. The mountain and sea realm has two divine monarchs guarding the gate. They can divine the past and the future, and can see into the hearts of people. Quite a few people with evil intentions have been killed outside the great gate. Exalted True, if you have a disciple like that, please do not let him pass, lest his life be in danger. Lianji Shan looked at him and said, I'm just a guest. You worry too much. Inwardly he laughed coldly. Others might not know about the two Yuan Zun cultivators of the mountain and sea realm, but how could he not? Those two were the incarnations of the deceased's true yang energy. If they really were that powerful, then wouldn't all of his fellow Taoists have long since been killed? The deacon Taoist didn't say anything else. He bowed again and left. Not long after, the sky-towering palace slowly moved and the two worlds closed. Lien Jishan could sense that none of his disciples had been injured, nor could he sense anything out of the ordinary. He couldn't help but smile as he looked down at the lands below him. So this is the mountain and sea realm, huh? However, as he looked around, he was deeply shocked by the abundance of spiritual opportunity in this place. He had spent some time in the 12 great heavens of the Yuhuan heavens, but he had never encountered a place with such dense spiritual qi. Even the Qinghua heavens could not compare to it. If a cultivator were to cultivate here, they would be able to obtain many benefits. He couldn't help but think, if I can use this place. At this moment, the disciple said, "Martial uncle, no one else has entered the realm after us. It seems like they've been stopped again." Lien Jishan looked around, and sure enough, no one else had entered. He smiled playfully. Before coming here, everyone had used their magical devices to make divinations about the dangers of this place and how the situation would develop. Every time they did, the result was that they would come out on top. Therefore, no matter what the mountain and sea realm did, it didn't matter. Under the guidance of the deacons, the skyscraping palace platform landed on top of the Tianyue Peak. Then, the middle-aged Taoist brought a group of disciples to the encampment. After settling down, he dismissed his disciples and changed his spiritual will. In an instant, he escaped into the unknown. Before long, a dashing Taoist with a lotus leaf headband appeared in front of him. The Taoist clasped his hands and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoist Fong Luo." Reverend Fong Luo returned the greeting, then laughed and said, "I've been here for a long time, but I haven't seen any of you. Now that you've come, I'm relieved." Lien Jishan said, "There's no need to worry, fellow Taoist Fong. When the time comes, there will be other ways to enter. Since you've come here first, I'm sure you've already investigated the situation of the mountain and sea realm. Can you tell me clearly?" Fong Luo chuckled and said, "In the past, I thought the invasion of the mountain and sea realm was just making a mountain out of a molehill. Now that I see it, it makes sense." Lien Jishan said, "Oh? Did you see something, fellow Taoist?" Fong Luo said, "Just now that you're here, fellow Taoist, you should be able to see that the spiritual qi here far surpasses the earth and universe heavens." Lien Jishan said, "That's right. The spiritual qi here is flourishing, and I've never seen it before." Fong Luo said, "How can cultivators not be strong when they cultivate here? After 1,000,000 years, the earth and universe heavens will definitely be suppressed by them." Lien Jishan didn't take it to heart. No matter how strong the spiritual qi was, could it be stronger than the Kanchi continent? If they felt that they couldn't compete with others, they could just move their sect to the Kanchi continent. Besides, the cultivators of the earth and universe heavens weren't dead. Would they not change after seeing such a change? If that was the case, then it was only natural that they would be overtaken. He had only come because of the benefits that someone had promised him, and because he wanted to get his hands on some of the treasures of the mountain and sea realm. Nothing else mattered to him. Fong Luo saw that Lien Jishan's expression was indifferent, and knew that he wasn't interested in listening. Therefore, he didn't pursue the topic. "The most powerful sects in the mountain and sea realm are the Qinsong and the Shaoqing sects," he said. "I heard that they led the other sects to take over the mountain and sea realm. That's especially true of the Qinsong school, where Yuan Zun came from." "Yuan Zun, huh?" Lien Jishan's expression flickered. Although Yuan Zun would be dealt with by Yuan Zun, he didn't dare to be disrespectful. However, the more he thought about it, the more shocked he became. By participating in the mountain and sea realm, didn't that mean that he had offended Yuan Zun? How could he possibly end up in a good situation? Furthermore, how could so many fellow Taoists not have thought about this? Just now that thought popped up in his mind, and yet another indescribable thought rose up in his mind. Immediately, he cast his misgivings to the back of his mind. His eyes flickered with killing intent. In that case, all we have to do is seriously injure the disciples of those two sects, and we'll have accomplished our goal? Fong Luo nodded. "You could say that." Lien Jishan asked, "Where are the disciples of those two sects right now?" They haven't shown themselves yet, Fong Luo replied, which means they're making some sort of arrangement. However, the battle is about to begin, so they'll show up eventually. There's no need to worry about that. My arrangements are almost complete. Now it's up to you, fellow Taoists. Back in Heaven Peak, Jiang Mingtang was fighting with an opponent. Jiang Mingtang had spotted a flaw in his opponent's defense and had unleashed his core qi. His opponent's last line of defense was broken, and Jiang Mingtang unleashed a beam of spiritual light that slammed into his opponent, knocking him out of the arena. Seeing that he had defeated his opponent, he left the arena as well. However, after he landed on the ground, he couldn't help but sway a little. It was obvious that he had used up a lot of mana. Different from the previous battles, the people he was fighting now were all outstanding disciples of various sects, and they didn't lack any instruments or medicinal pills. However, when the opponent had an instrument to protect them, it meant that he had to find a way to break through the gap in order to attack them. This made the battle exceptionally long. Even those who were experienced in battle might not have much of an advantage. As long as the difference in mana wasn't too big, most of them would end up in a battle of attrition. Luckily, there were rules in the battle, and the medicinal pills they brought were limited. Therefore, it couldn't be dragged out for too long. Even so, it was still abnormally strenuous. Just now, he had used up all of his opponent's medicinal pills before he found a chance to defeat him. At this moment, the sect elder walked over and handed him a bright red medicinal pill the size of a pigeon egg. He took it and consumed it. He sat down to regulate his breathing for a while, and his spirit was restored. The sect elder asked warmly, "How is it? Can we continue the battle today?" Jiang Mingtang took a breath and said, "It's fine. I can still fight another round." Although it had only been 2 days since the start of the battle gathering, it was unusually intense. There were quite a number of sects that lost every round, and no longer had the right to continue. The Soaring Star sect was slightly better, but that was all. There weren't many disciples in the sect who could show their faces. If they wanted to continue staying in the battle gathering, then they had to rely on him to hold the fort. This wasn't the only reason he was here. Even if the Soaring Star sect was really eliminated, it was impossible for them to leave this place. If he continued to win, then he could easily obtain the chance to talk to the disciples of the major sections. However, up until now, the Qinsong sect and the Shaoqing sect had yet to arrive, so he naturally couldn't see anyone who wanted to interact with them. In his memory, about 10 days later, these two sects would appear just now. He thought to himself, "I just hope that nothing goes wrong." Within the Heavenly Mountain Formation's pivot, Zhang Jin received the request of the two sects and spent 2 days to set up a ceremonial platform. She also placed an arcane tool that she brought from the sect on top of it. As she willed it, bolts of lightning flashed past, and amidst the rumbling sounds, the item slowly sank into the formation. Wei Zihong asked, "Senior apprentice uncle, how is it?" Zhang Jin said, "After I buried this arcane tool, my senses can increase by several folds. As long as there's any abnormal qi activity appearing in the Heavenly Mountain Formation, I can immediately go and eliminate it. However, there are 3 wisps of qi activity that escaped outside and are not within the Heaven Secrets. They should have been intentionally concealed by someone." Wei Zihong asked, "I wonder if Senior Apprentice Uncle can calculate whose qi activity it is?" Zhang Zhen pondered for a while, then shook her head lightly and said, "The formation has just been set up and it's still hard to know. After a few days, we might be able to see a thing or two. However, once the other party realizes that the qi activity is being chased away, they will definitely counterattack. Thus, Sect Leader Wei still needs to prepare for a backup plan and not place all our hopes on this." Wei Zihong couldn't help but nod. At this moment he suddenly felt something in his heart, and with a point of his finger, a formation door opened in front of him. After a while, Shen Tong walked out from inside. He first bowed to the two, then said to Wei Zihong, "Just now, there was another Jinren from the Yuhuan Heavens. However, after he passed through the Forbidden Light, his qi activity was different. This person is most likely an enlightenment cultivator, but he concealed his cultivation base. However, the two divine monarchs didn't say anything. Wei Zihong thought for a while, then raised his head to look at the sky, and said, "The two divine monarchs haven't responded for a long time, so they are either being held back, or something strange has happened. Otherwise, this person wouldn't have the guts to enter the realm. Looks like we can only rely on our own strength." Chapter 2085. Outside the mountains, seas, and land, there was a heavenly ship floating in the air. It was the victorious heavenly ship that Zhang Yan had refined using the unfettered wood. It could travel through the universe and land without a trace. However, he no longer had any use for it after attaining the spirit refinement realm, so he left it in the mountain and sea realm and entrusted it to the sex envoy. However, because of its cultivation, no one could use it. Those who could use it had to at least sever their past and future bodies. Therefore, the Qinsong school simply used it as a place for secret meetings. If there was anything important that needed to be discussed, they could come here. This was equivalent to jumping out of karma. Even the true Yang Yuanzun would not be able to detect it. At that moment, the sound of huge waves suddenly came from the heavenly ship. A clear light flashed, and Mengjida appeared on the platform in the middle of the ship. He only stood there for a moment before he saw millions of specks of starlight sprinkling down in front of him. Then they gathered into a human figure. It was the Shaoqing elder Ing Chuanqiu. Mengjida bowed and said, "Fellow Taoist Ing, greetings." Ing Chuanqiu returned the greeting and said, "Fellow Taoist Meng, greetings." After the greeting, the two of them sat down cross-legged on the jade seats of the heavenly ship. Mengjida said, "Fellow Taoist Ing, you must already know that there are cultivators from beyond the heavens coming to harm the mountain and sea sects during the magical competition." Ing Chuanqiu said, "I was aware of it before. I was planning to divine it, but I found out that this person has long since mixed up the heavenly secrets. It seems like he is plotting something big. What does the Duzhen Hall Master have to say about this?" Mengjida said, "The Duzhen Hall Master has not said a word." Ing Chuanqiu thought about it. Zhang Yan was a spirit refinement almighty. Since he did not mention this matter, there must be a deeper meaning behind it. This was not something he could speculate about at the moment. Mengjida said, "There are many people of the same generation coming, and there is no lack of Duju cultivators among them. Therefore, we have to make an appearance." Ing Chuanqiu nodded. If it was an ordinary matter, there was no need for them to show up. However, there were many people with high cultivation and magic power in the Yuhuan All Heavens, and it was unknown how many people would come this time. As the elders with the highest cultivation, they naturally could not sit idly by. Mengjida said, "The two divine monarchs, Bo Bai and Bo Xian, are currently blocked by their magic power and can't communicate with me. It's already difficult to rely on them. This crisis can only be overcome by the mountain and sea realm." Ing Chuanqiu asked, "How will your sect deal with this?" Mengzhen said, "If we start fighting in the mountain and sea realm, the losses will be too great. Therefore, it's best to keep the enemy outside the realm gate." Ing Chuanqiu said, "Indeed. Even if Tianyue was placed in the turbid azure sky, it was hard to guarantee that this place wouldn't collapse if many mortal metamorphosis Shinrens started to fight. Although this place was an independent world, it was also entrusted to the mountain, sea, and land. If the land was shaken, this great situation would definitely be damaged. Now that the two realms were closed, although it was much stricter than before, it wasn't very useful. When faced with people with ulterior motives, even closing the heaven and earth gate would be useless. If the enemy could be stopped so easily, then this invasion would be too much of a trifling matter. The enemy would definitely have a way to break into the realm in the blink of an eye, and wouldn't be delayed for dozens of years. Therefore, it would be better to move the battlefield outside the mountain and sea realm. If the mountain and sea realm didn't have the prime exalted Zhang Yan, then it would be difficult for the mountain and sea realm to fight against the Yuhuan All Heavens. However, the people who came this time were only a small portion of the Yuhuan All Heavens, and they could still deal with them. After all, the sects of the 9 continents had improved greatly, and were no longer the same as they had been when they faced Kong Yin. 7 days passed in the blink of an eye. The Qinsong and Shaoqing sects finally arrived on Tianyue. However, the disciples of the two sects sat quietly in their encampments and did not participate in the fighting. The disciples of the other sects didn't find it strange. After all, everyone knew that the legacy disciples of the two sects were far more powerful than those of the same generation. If they joined the fray, the disciples of the other sects would have a hard time standing up to them. Currently, in the Shaoqing sect's encampment, Ran Xiushu was sitting on a dais. With a serious expression, he said, "Shuiyan, you are the most outstanding disciple of my bloodline. In this battle of magic, you absolutely must do well for me. I'm counting on you to make me proud." Below the dais stood a beautiful young woman. Her hair was combed into 2 rings, and she wore a jade necklace ornament. She wore a black gauze gown, which was covered by a silk cape with thousands of knotted pearls. Her wide sleeves were decorated with dark-colored silk, and she wore a skirt with hundreds of ribbons. She listened attentively to Ran Xiushu's words, and then solemnly voiced her assent. Ran Xiushu nodded in satisfaction. "Not bad. You are the most outstanding disciple of the younger generation. The extreme sword bloodline will be relying on you to carry it to greater heights." The young woman fell silent for a moment before saying, "Although I'm cultivating under the extreme sword masters, I'm learning the killing sword." Ran Xiushu made a sound of acknowledgement. Then he waved his sleeve and said, "So be it. Compared to victory or defeat, this is just a small matter. If you win, don't forget to announce that you're my disciple." At the side, Yuning couldn't help but say, "Master, Shuiyan is my disciple." Ran Xiushu said indifferently, "It's the same, it's the same." Yuning mumbled, "How can it be the same?" Ran Xiushu waved his sleeve and said, "All right, I'm done. You can leave now." Yuning had no choice but to bow and leave with her disciple, Yu Shuiyan. Yu Shuiyan saw her master's gloomy expression, so she comforted her, "Master, Grandmaster is just reprimanding you now not because he's dissatisfied with you, nor is he going to teach me personally. He's just showing off his dignity as a master. Master, don't take it to heart." Hearing this, Yuning's eyes widened. "Really?" She seemed to heave a sigh of relief. "Then I can be at ease. Disciple, you don't know that your Grandmaster's cultivation is high, but the disciples he taught are all mediocre." Yu Shuiyan silently glanced at her master and didn't say anything else. Meanwhile, on the other side, Jiang Mingtang stood in front of the palace gate of the Shaoqing sect's base. After finding out that the Shaoqing sect had arrived, he had been wanting to find his way here. However, he had been fighting on behalf of his sect. Today, he used fatigue as an excuse, and just now, he was able to find time to come here. This was the only place among the various sects' bases that didn't have any restrictions or defenses set up. There weren't even any guards. This was because the disciples of the Shaoqing sect were never afraid of enemies invading. If you're here, then feel free to come. I can't ask for more. He walked through the gate and arrived at the front of the palace. He glanced around, and just as he was about to walk further in, he heard a voice nearby. "Fellow Taoist, who are you looking for? Perhaps I can help you." Jiang Mingtang stopped in his tracks in shock. He turned around, and only then did he discover a young cultivator who was as gentle as jade standing just a few steps away. He was dressed in a button-down robe and a cloak with purple clouds and stars on the outside. His figure could be said to be handsome and tall. Jiang Mingtang thought for a moment. Actually, he had seen the other party just now, but for some reason, he just happened to ignore him. Only when the other party spoke did he come back to his senses. He hurriedly bowed and said, "I didn't see fellow Taoist here. Please forgive me." The young cultivator smiled warmly and said, "It's fine." He knew that even though his appearance was not bad, for some reason, he always gave others a feeling of mediocrity. In addition, the sword transformation art that he cultivated was inclined towards concealment and transformation. Therefore, it was extremely easy for others to overlook him just by standing there. He had long been used to this. At this moment, Jiang Mingtang said, "I'm Jiang Mingtang from the High Star sect. This time, I've come to your station because I heard that there's a fellow Taoist called Li Hanshao here with extraordinary sword skills. Therefore, I've come here to spar with him. From the memories in the dream, this time, the Shaoqing sect had sent out many outstanding people. Among them, Yu Shuiyin and Li Hanshao were the most outstanding, and both of them had extraordinary achievements in the future. These two people could be approached in the name of a challenge. However, Yu Shuiyin had never shown mercy when fighting with disciples from outside the sect. If he lost, it was very likely that he would be killed on the spot. This was not asking for help, but seeking death. As for Li Hanshao, he could be said to be a good person. Even when he sparred with people from outside the sect, he rarely killed them. Compared to him, this person was easier to deal with. The young cultivator looked at him and cupped his hands. So, fellow Taoist Jiang has specially come to look for me. Forgive me for my rudeness. Jiang Mingtang was stunned. He said in shock, Fellow Taoist is Li Hanshao? Li Hanshao smiled. If fellow Taoist is looking for Li Hanshao of the Shaoqing sect and not someone else with the same name, then it's me. Jiang Mingtang took a deep breath with great effort. His expression became solemn. He said, I wonder if fellow Taoist is willing to spar with me? Li Hanxiao's expression also became solemn. He said, I'm a disciple of the Shaoqing sect. I never refuse a challenge from my peers. He took a step to the side and raised his hand. Fellow Taoist, please. Jiang Mingtang cupped his hands and followed him to the arena of the Shaoqing sect's station. He knew that there was no need for him to be courteous with a Shaoqing cultivator. So, when he arrived here, he made the first move after saying sorry. His pill-baleful chi surged and pressed towards the other party. However, a sword light flashed and tore the pill-baleful chi apart. Then his vision blurred, and he saw dozens of sword lights shooting towards him. He could not help but feel shocked. At the same time, he felt that his protective magic treasure was trembling endlessly. His magic power also seemed to be colliding with the other party, unable to gather at a single point. In less than a breath's time, the magic treasure wailed. Its spiritual light dimmed, and it fell to the ground. Then, the dozens of rainbow lights gathered, and a hazy white sword light landed before the tip of his nose. He could not help but be stunned. Even though he knew that he would definitely lose to the other party, he did not expect the difference between them to be so great. He felt rather dejected and sighed. I've lost. Li Hanshao looked at him and said, Fellow Taoist Jiang, there's no need to be discouraged. It's not like I've never competed with fellow Taoists outside of the sect. These fellow Taoists are usually unable to withstand a single strike of my sword, yet you need me to use the light-splitting sword to attack you. Compared to others, you're already not bad. Jiang Mingtang smiled bitterly. This fellow Taoist Li spoke honestly. He cupped his hands and said, I have some doubts. May I ask you a few questions? Li Hanshao looked at him and said, I know that you're not here for a battle. Jiang Mingtang was shocked. You can tell, fellow Taoist Li? Li Hanshao summoned the sword pellet back and said, This isn't the place to talk. Fellow Taoist, follow me. When he finished, he turned around and walked toward a pavilion not far away. Chapter 2086. Jiang Mingtang followed Li Hanshao to the pavilion at the side. He discovered that the terrain here was extremely high. Looking down from there, he could see the fights between the various sects clearly. Since the Shaoqing disciples were stationed here, it was not difficult for them to see the fights between the various sects even if they did not leave. Li Hanshao arrived at the host's seat and gestured with his hand, Sit. Jiang Mingtang expressed his gratitude and sat down opposite the man. Li Hanshao sat down as well and instructed the formation spirit to serve tea. He said, There are restrictions set up here, so there's no need to be afraid of outsiders noticing. Taoist Jiang, you can say whatever you want to say. Jiang Mingtang pondered for a while and said seriously, What I'll say later might be a little shocking, but I'm not spouting nonsense. I hope that you can listen to what I have to say. Li Hanshao also revealed a serious expression and said, Please speak, Taoist. Jiang Mingtang said slowly, There's a divine art in my sect that allows me to see the truth in my dreams, and thus make up for any mistakes. I had a dream a few days ago, in which I experienced several hundred years of cultivation until I became a Yuanying cultivator. At this point, he secretly glanced at Li Hanxiao. Seeing that the latter's expression was the same as just now, without any intention of making fun of him, he was finally at ease and continued, "What's even more strange is that the various experiences I experienced later on all proved that what I saw in my dream was real." He paused and could not help but ask, "Taoist Li, you don't seem surprised?" Li Hanxiao muttered to himself for a moment before saying, "Although what you experienced is mysterious, it is also possible. Especially since your sect's cultivation technique is unique. If it wasn't the work of an upper realm almighty, then it must be that you were blessed by the heavens. Only then would you have such fate." Jiang Mingtang nodded repeatedly and said, "I think so too." Li Hanxiao looked over and said, "It's just that these are your personal matters, and yet you're saying that I know about them now. It's obvious that you've seen something extremely important. Perhaps it's related to this competition?" Jiang Mingtang could not help but reveal an expression of admiration. Who said that disciples of the Shaoqing lineage did not understand the ways of the world? This person could more or less see through his purpose for coming here with just a few words. He said, "I won't hide it from you. Originally, I thought I would be able to obtain some benefits by relying on this method, but after arriving here, many of the details of my dream that I had forgotten in the past were recalled. One of them was that I saw blood and fire on top of Heaven Peak. I didn't know where an enemy had invaded this place, but I just so happened to be saved by Brother Li at that time. That was how I escaped with my life. After he met Hua Yingling and the others, he discovered that they seemed to be able to see something. So he had originally planned to keep a low profile and not stand out if he could. But in these 2 days, he had many dreams. He did not see the future, but rather remembered many details. He knew that in this competition, an unexpected change had occurred, and it had affected many people. After knowing about this, he was very worried for the sect and wanted to tell them the truth. But after all, his words carried little weight. Even if he did so, it would be difficult for him to gain the trust of others. Originally, he was prepared to let Hua Yingling know about these things. After all, he owed him a debt of gratitude for his guidance. Not only was he trustworthy, but he should also be able to arrange everything properly with his help. Unfortunately, when he wanted to pay a visit, Li Hanxiao had already announced that he was in seclusion. Until now, he had not been able to meet him. Seeing that an unforeseen event could happen at any time, he could only come here first. After all, Li Hanxiao had saved him once in his dream memory. He was a trustworthy person. Li Hanxiao thought for a while and said, "Since Brother Jiang was saved by me, I believe that we should have been in the competition at that time?" Jiang Mingtang said, "That's right." Li Hanxiao said, "What sword technique did I use at that time?" Jiang Mingtang shook his head and said, "I did not succeed at that time. Just now, when I was about to act, an unforeseen event happened." Li Hanxiao asked again, "Then do you remember what I was wearing at that time?" Jiang Mingtang was taken aback. He frowned and thought carefully, then looked at Li Hanxiao and said, "It's different now. You should have been wearing a Taoist robe with black gold patterns." Li Hanxiao's expression changed slightly. He cupped his hands and said, "Can you stay here for now? I'll be right back." Jiang Mingtang also cupped his hands and said, "All right, I'll wait for you here." On the other side of the Shaoqing encampment, Lu Zhipei walked out with a happy expression. Just now, he had used the excuse of seeking advice from the 2 Shaoqing disciples who left their names in the future. Although he had lost, he had managed to befriend them. Before the unforeseen event happened, he only needed to find an excuse to hide here and retreat with the 2 of them. It would not be difficult for him to avoid this calamity. At the same time, in the heavenly peak, Lian Jishan sat on his sect's throne and watched the battle below. Over the past few days, the cultivators of the Yuhuan heavens had also begun to fight. Both sides had won and lost. However, he had come to realize that the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm, even those from small rogue sects, were able to hold their own against the disciples of the great sects of the Yuhuan heavens. That was especially true of the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm, whose magical power was superior to that of the cultivators of the Yuhuan heavens. It wasn't because of their techniques, but rather because the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm had been bathing in abundant spiritual energy for too long. From what he could tell, although things were going well for the moment, once the disciples of the great sects of the mountain and sea realm entered the fray, it would be difficult for the cultivators of the Yuhuan heavens to maintain the situation. Even as he pondered the matter, he suddenly sensed something. His divine will shifted, and he saw Reverend Fong Luo standing there. "Fellow Taoist, why did you call for me?" he asked. Fong Luo chuckled. "I just wanted to ask about something. I heard that the disciples of the Qinsong and Shaoqing sects have arrived. When are you planning to make your move? I'll be able to coordinate with you." Lien Jishan shook his head. "Our targets are the elites of those two sections. If they're mediocre, what's the point of killing them? Since they haven't shown themselves yet, it's hard to know exactly what's going on. We'll have to wait and see. When the time comes, I'll let you know." "So that's the reason," Fong Luo said. "In that case, I'll be waiting for word from you, fellow Taoist." With that he bowed and then left. Lien Jishan retreated from the divine will, his face a bit gloomy. Just now, although he was saying that, the truth was that after he had sent the message, his backer had been cautious, and had performed another round of divination. However, this time, there were many variables that had appeared out of nowhere. In order to avoid any mishaps, Lien Jishan had continued to wait for the right opportunity. However, after that, he had asked questions every day, and received no response. He wasn't sure why, and therefore didn't dare to act rashly. That was when a beam of light appeared off in the distance, landing at the bottom of the stairs. A disciple appeared, clasped hands, and said, "Master, it's time for a disciple of the Imperial Wall sect to fight." Lien Jishan thought about it for a moment. Even if he couldn't do anything right now, there was no harm in openly slaughtering the elites of the mountain and sea realm's junior generation. Therefore, he called out, "Lien Xe, disciple is here." A cultivator stepped out from the crowd of disciples. He looked to be in his 30s, and there was nothing eye-catching about him. However, his expression was calm. Lien Jishan said, "You'll be the one to fight. Remember, you can only win. Defeat is not an option." He paused for a moment. "I'm sure you know exactly what to do." Lien Xian bowed. "Disciple will remember." Lien Jishan said, "Very well. You may go." Lien Xian immediately rode on a wisp of Dan Sha and went down to an altar. A deacon Taoist was waiting there. When he saw him coming, he first took his name token and checked it. Then, he waved his sleeve and opened a door. Without the slightest hesitation, Lien Xian stepped inside. When he emerged, he found himself in the middle of the sky, surrounded by numerous floating mountains. There was a flash of light in front of him, and a red-robed cultivator appeared. He bowed and said, "100 South Civ Continents, Eternal Victory Island, Gu Chengwen." Lien Xian raised his hand and said, "Myriad Remnant Heavens, Imperial Wall Sect, Lien Xian." After the two of them reported their names, they retreated. After a moment of confrontation, they made a move at the same time. Gu Chengwen's side was considered to be in line with the rules. He first cast his protective magic weapon, then he used his spiritual power to test the opponent's strength. Then, he would look for an opportunity according to the situation. However, Lien Xian didn't do that. He didn't even unleash his defensive magical item. He simply waved his hand, and a stream of core qi came from afar, landing directly around Gu Chengwen's body. In just a moment, the latter's defensive magical item seemed to have suffered great damage, and its spiritual light dimmed at a visible rate. Even though Gu Chengwen had lost his defensive magical item, that didn't mean he didn't have the power to fight. However, when his magical item was suddenly destroyed, he couldn't help but panic, and he revealed a huge opening. Lien Xian saw this and decisively took advantage of the opportunity to unleash a powerful green light. In an instant, half of Gu Chengwen's body exploded. Blood and flesh flew everywhere, and he fell down. Before he could hit the ground, a spiritual light flew over, and with a flash, he disappeared. The grand competition of the various sects wasn't a life and death battle, so killing was not allowed. However, if there were too many restrictions during the competition, it wouldn't be easy to display one's true strength. Thus, at critical moments, there would be guards to help. Lien Exine didn't plan on killing his opponent. What he wanted to do was to destroy his opponent's foundation. That way, he wouldn't need to kill his opponent, and would also be able to suppress the morale of the mountain and sea disciples. A beam of light flickered, and the Taoist guard from before appeared. He said to Lien Exine, "Honored sir, would you like to continue?" Lien Exine replied, "Just now, that fellow Taoist techniques are quite ordinary, and I haven't lost much of my magical power. I would like to experience the brilliance of the fellow Taoists of the mountain and sea realm." When the various sects of the mountain and sea realm saw his attitude, it caused quite a bit of dissatisfaction. Another disciple stepped forward to fight him, but to their surprise, he didn't last long before being defeated. After that, quite a few more people stepped forward to challenge him. However, none of them were able to defeat him. In the end, all of their treasures were destroyed, and they were severely injured. Furthermore, the losers suffered particularly bitter defeats. If they weren't missing an arm or a leg, then half of their body would be destroyed. It was important to note that before a Taoist cultivator severed their mortal body, the fleshly body was like a raft to cross the world. It couldn't be easily damaged. Even if a severed limb could be regrown, it would likely damage the foundation, which was very detrimental to Taoist cultivation. If the sects had a choice, they wouldn't focus on training these disciples. Therefore, their future paths towards the Tao would undoubtedly be very uncertain. Even so, the cultivators of the various sects weren't intimidated and sent their disciples to fight. However, Lien Exine's strength was beyond imagination. He won for 3 days in a row, defeating no less than 20 opponents. For a time, he was in the limelight. Perhaps because the disciples of the smaller sects knew that they weren't a match for him. On the 4th day, disciples from the larger sects stepped forward. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.